Before we dig in today, I want to shout out my friend Sandro, who is finally releasing the very first issue of his webcomic, The Afterman Chronicles. It's a sci-fi story about biomechanical guys with cool powers, kind of Bionicle meets Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I have had the privilege of following its development for many years now, actually. Mostly that was him like pitching me nomenclature and plots and be like, but you know, I couldn't do it like this because of reasons, and then he had already perfectly solved the plot and the ideas every time, and I would just say, you can do it that way, you absolutely can. And then he did, and it was great, and it was a very easy way to contribute to this thing. Sandro has worked on this basically half his life, and I'm so excited for it to finally come out. I'm going to put the link for it at the very top of the video description. I'm not being paid for this, by the way. I did get an advance copy, a digital copy from him, but that was more of a thank you for the support he received, I think. It's super cool, it looks gorgeous, and it's unique in a way that I think is going to scratch a lot of very particular itches that you may not even know you had. So go check it out, and now onward to what we actually wanted to talk about. I'm just kidding. Lancer is a game set in the distant year 5016, and it's about the complex political dance of altruistic policy with the unfortunate practicalities of the real world. Revolutionary fervor narrowly pressed through the orifices of bureaucracy, solidarity administered with such generosity that even the vile tyrants benefit from it. It's a game about the ethics of benevolent imperialism, friction created by unhappy tolerance of less canny but pragmatically required rivals, questions of standard of living versus erasure of authentic cultural identity, and the consequences of policy formulated in an environment where causality is a major theoretical consideration, the limits of science, and the exploration of tangible reality. Except, let's be honest, it's not really about any of that. It's about, like, big fuck-off mechs, baby. Big human robot piloted, controlled war machines. Super destruction, boom boom mega war with ultra powerful hyper weaponry, so powerful that it breaks reality. Running hot with onboard fusion reactors, electric guitar riffs playing as you jetpack through a column of guided missiles that you've tricked into not seeing you with the help of your personal supercomputer named Clegg. You might be deceived into thinking that it's about all that other stuff if you read the lore, but Lancer suffers from a fundamental issue. The gameplay of Lancer is not about the lore of Lancer. The lore is an interesting exercise in speculative political world building, but at the end of the day, the player characters are mech pilots deployed to high-risk missions. You are a piece of plankton buffeted around by the wake of whales in an ocean made of golden honey. You just so happen to have a gun that hits its target before you pull the trigger. It's about the relationships you develop with your fellow pilots, right? And sometimes that intersects with high-minded ideals, but a lot of the time, those relationships are just gay. That's how it is, folks. I didn't make the rules of the mech genre. They are gay. Every mech pilot is queer, not because they're mech pilots, but because this is the good future, and everyone is allowed to taste the rainbow. Even the people who don't want to. They can taste it and go, no, I actually don't like it, and then they're straight in a queer way. The lore of Lancer is written for people like me, who enjoy looking at fictional org charts and imagining the ramifications of interdepartmental rivalries in an interstellar bureaucratic apparatus. And let me tell you something, people like me are wrong. That's not how you're supposed to enjoy things. Look, I really like this game. It is mechanically completely outside of the wheelhouse of what I usually enjoy, but I've played it a bunch. My most fun campaign as a player, really, that I've ever played of any game was the Lancer campaign. Sandro, the guy from the comic book, was in it. The science advisor for the comic was actually the GM. It has a really special place in my heart, and I've been asked to cover it a lot, especially by Matt, the science advisor. And while I think I'll do a good job of it, what I really recommend if you want more in-depth coverage of particular topics of the game presented in a hilarious style, you should check out 11 Dragon Kid's channel, which I will be linking also right here in the description, right down there. Maybe in the future they change its location again. Did you know that it used to be here? They've been making excellent Lancer content for a long time. They're one of the OGs in the community, and they should get a lot of respect for that. While the politics of Lancer are not as important as it might appear from reading the rulebook, they're not irrelevant to the lives of our characters. As soldiers, you are tools of violence in the pursuit of political aims, after all. And it just so happens that in Lancer, you play the good guys. Most of the time, at least. It's not always the case. The default campaign of Lancer assumes that you are in some form working for the great interstellar superpower known as Union. Really the greatest interstellar superpower. No other one comes close. There's competition, certainly, strong rivals, but most of them are sort of semi-integrated into Union. It has elements of a centralized government, but its immense bureaucracy ultimately pales with the size of the cosmos. So in practice, it's forced to give a lot of leeway, and so ultimately functions sort of like an executive-driven European Union. I suppose the European Union is unfortunately also quite executive-driven, isn't it? No one in there is aliens, by the way. We did meet aliens one time. They're not, strictly speaking, really around anymore. They're not around either. It's complicated. You could argue that the godlike super AIs from beyond reality that exist are aliens, but we've shaped those to be pretty damn human, even if we do call them non-human persons. The thing about Union is that they explicitly want to do good. They expand and build in order to bring prosperity to all, aiming to establish what they have constitutionally enshrined as their highest laws, the 3 utopian pillars. This is the opposite of the fucking Inglourious Bastard scene with me showing the 3. All shall have their material needs fulfilled. Union aims to bring the benefits of a post-scarcity society to as many worlds as it can, building the infrastructure and technological expertise to ensure that everyone has access to food, shelter, safety, and education. No walls shall stand between worlds. Union wants transit networks that move people from town to town and star to star. No one can be denied the right to move and migrate as they wish, and that it should be affordable to do so for anyone. No human shall be held in bondage through force, labor, or debt. This is not just about slavery, obviously, but any system that forces people to do things against their will with the threat of violence or destitution. This is especially true when that bondage exists to enrich a class of exploiters, hypothetically, at like the expense of a hypothetical class that it holds in sort of bondage, even if that's not a formal sort of bondage. Now, these pillars are not guarantees of how things are, but promises of what Union is trying to accomplish. Wherever it is, it will take the appropriate steps to ensure that the pillars are strengthened in whichever way makes sense for the place in question. Union can't guarantee that anyone can cross the galaxy in half an hour on a whim, or that no one ever has to lift a finger again, but they sure are working to make that happen. Some of their ventures are more successful than others, but there are 3 main strategic resources they control, which gives them such a predominant position in the decent chunk of the Orion arm that humanity calls home. And like for future reference, when I say the galaxy throughout the video, that sort of chunk is what I mean. These 3 resources are Blink Space, Mana, and the OmniNet. Some may call these things the real utopian pillars. And there's also a secret 4th thing, but we're not going to talk about that just yet. Blink Space is, as you might have suspected, this setting's means of faster than light travel. Any blink gate can transport you to any other blink gate nigh instantaneously. It does this by going through a non-Euclidean alternate dimension of infinite fractal possibility and potential. Unspeakable weirdness, so bizarre that the human mind cannot process this. So all we would see in Blink Space, and what we do see in the brief moments that we spend in Blink Space during transfer, is like absence. Not even nothing, but absence. Maybe prolonged exposure to Blink Space would create more clearly defined shapes, but we're only ever in Blink Space for a few moments, so who knows? Oh, and this is technically where Lance's AIs are from. They're not really AIs, they're non-corporeal alien entities. They come from blink space. Blink gates are not common. They are highly complex fault space constructs. Only the most important systems get one, and vanishingly few of them get multiple. Everyone else has to slowboat it on interstellar vessels that can only accelerate to 90% the speed of light. And that also comes with all the time dilation corollaries that you would assume. Mana is not just money, it is the money of money, the currency of currencies. You might be thinking, what use would a post-scarcity society have for money? And you would be correct. Most highly developed worlds use no money at all, and even on those worlds that do, mana is not the currency that everyday people use to pay for their groceries. It just so happens that, especially when you are on your way to a post-scarcity world, money can still be a great way to hold value and facilitate commerce. Mana itself functions almost like a natural resource more than cash. It's a multifactorial abstraction of economic power and future potential, and it's issued to various state actors within Union on that basis. In other words, if you have a system with immense production capacity, a certain amount of mana just exists in that system as an abstract measure of this. This allows Union to encourage the types of economic development that lend themselves to the implementation of the utopian pillars. If you work to exploit resources in a sustainable manner and distribute the benefits to all, you unlock massive economic potential, which is one of the primary markers by which mana is allocated. Mana is a tremendous reserve currency and facilitates not just interstellar trade, but can be used to pay for things only Union knows how to provide. The OmniNet it's just the internet, but in space. It's instantaneous and interstellar because it goes through blink space. Except an OmniNet node is much easier to construct than a blink gate, and so OmniNet access is much more widespread. It's somewhat limited in bandwidth, so most places also maintain a local internet that manages requests through the OmniNet and stores many copies of transmittable data locally. But the way this manifests is kind of like you have to wait for a Steam download to finish. It's not immediate. In rare cases, if you are the very first person in your system who wants to watch Hoot But Don't Holler, the classic reality dating show about autistic owls, you might have to put in a library order, and all 17 seasons of it will be downloaded by tomorrow morning. This is a big deal in the Lancer universe, though, because the many different families of humanity were disconnected from one another for millennia, to the extent that some eventually forgot that there were humans elsewhere altogether. Having channels for cultural exchange is a great boon for the spread of Union's ideology, especially because most culture is produced by the highly developed metropolitan worlds, where people have little to do except create art all day. You will note that none of these strategic resources Union controls are passive positions upon which they rent-seek to extract resources from their client states. Instead, they are services and opportunities that require an enormous amount of sustained effort and communication to run and expand, and access to which gives immense benefits. Union is giving away things everybody wants, and so everybody wants to get close to Union. Even far, far away, you cannot help but feel the pull of its benevolent gravity. And that's pretty much all most people know about Union. In the daily life of the overwhelming majority of human beings, Union is a distant force that they know they are somewhere within, but which ultimately they see very little of. Instead, you'll be steeped in the weird and varied modalities of your own culture. Union aims for the grand scale, so while you interact and rely on Union systems all the time, most of that seems just natural to you. And that's how Union prefers it. Because there's a fourth pillar that is unwritten and really unadmitted to, more of a political reality than a law. Humanity shall not be standardized. It is important that everyone be able to maintain their identity so long as the identity does not conflict with the utopian pillars. Because Union didn't always used to be the good guys, and those utopian pillars didn't always really stand for freedom. Union is trying to correct the mistakes of its past. But more on that later, because this is about you and your place in the world. You are not just a random person. You are a mech pilot. And you're not just a random mech pilot. You are a Lancer. They are an archetype of a sort of like a cultural icon, like knights, gunslingers, or samurais of the old world, heroic combat specialists embroiled in grand righteous quests and often chaotic personal drama. Where exactly the line is between a mech pilot and a lancer is very much up to interpretation. A certain degree of doctrinal or operational independence are often defining, though not necessarily a must. Certainly a high degree of custom options are available, but much of this is due to the fact that the game takes place in an era that puts great importance on diversity and individual expression. Even in a military squadron, you're not all going to have the same gear and training. This is, after all, still a role-playing game. And of course, even ordinary squads of soldiers have varied skill sets. Lancers are just a cut above the rest, so competent at what they do that they are trusted to make decisions as to what mech to fly, what systems to put in there, and most importantly, what color to paint it. Their superiors are not going to babysit these decisions for them because they know it would be deleterious to their efficacy. There are many paths to becoming a lancer. It's not a course you can take in mech school. Only in your life. You may be a lifelong megalopolis dweller enlisted with the Union Navy to see the galaxy, then aced every unit in special curriculum of the mech training thing to become a lancer. You may have grown up on a frontier world using the old family chassis to protect the farm from bandits and towering predators. You may be a noble from the Caracan trade baronies, trained from an early age in martial arts, chief among them the honored tradition of mechanized combat. You may be a member of a spacefaring tribe that spends most of its time in the interstellar void, part of an ops team that repels pirate intruders. You may be an enthusiast who spent years building their own custom mech from scratch and has such a deep understanding of it that you basically work as one. You may be a scientist who enlisted as a freedom fighter to protect their world from imperialist forces. There are many, even much weirder paths to becoming a lancer. Reading the rules, it can sometimes feel like there are certain people who just innately have this mystical quality, and everyone else doesn't. You'll work with a small team of people that are your crew, your closest friends and most heated rivals. And every single one of you brings your own identity to the table, both as a pilot, but also in your mech. There are thousands of different mech frames that exist canonically. And I believe at this point, almost like 100 of those are available as player options, not counting the rich world of Lancer homebrew. But it's not as simple as getting a mech frame and being done with it. Every mech in Lancer is modular and fully customizable, with all systems being perfectly interoperable between various manufacturers, thanks to not just regulation, but also customer expectation. Because we are in a vast post-scarcity world, Lancers don't necessarily own individual mechs and mech parts, but the rights to print them. Mechs, much like matter printers themselves, are restricted technologies that Union keeps tightly controlled for obvious reasons. In-game, this is represented by so-called licenses, which are usually blueprints, instruction manuals, and authorization codes that can be fed into a printer or like help with assembly in other ways, so like an IKEA pamphlet. In some cases, they also mean that manufacturers will ship things to you or grant appointments with their local technicians or just train you in the skills required to make and install certain systems. You can theoretically have a license and be unable to produce the according mech as a canon event, but this is not what the game is about. So while you are a Lancer, whatever requirements you need to meet to get your licensed mech, you will meet pretty much at any time. Yeah, I do have a license for that mech. This means that every mech, and perhaps every incarnation of every mech, is unique. It's not like with cars where you can have a blue one or a white one or a yellow one, or maybe if you're feeling fancy you can get custom fenders. Ooh, a Toyota Camry is going to look like a Toyota Camry. Lancers assemble mech in a customized manner from the ground up. And sometimes mechs become so heavily customized that a team of engineers gets together and designs a whole new frame with a whole new license around it. For instance, this and this, they are the same mech, but so far diverged that if you didn't know, you might not know. Same for this one and this one, right? You can see the similarities only because you're seeing them in a rulebook. This one and this one, too. It might be a stretch to assume that they're related at all, but they are in fact cousins. There are 5 big manufacturers of mechs within Union, and they are all massive corporate centers of power in their own right. They're all primarily invested in other industries, but their mechs are the finest and most ubiquitous, so the majority of Lancers fly them and nothing else. And I'm going to list them here in order of how normal they are, going into not just their mechs, but also what kind of organization they are beyond the chassis retail relationship. Because these corporate states define much of the political world of Lancer and the underlying ideological conflicts. We start with the number one, the basics, the stainless steel standard, General Massive Systems. GMS is one of the oldest manufacturers around, and you might argue they are the ones who pioneered mech technology and printed the very first frames. But their role is much bigger than that. They are a state-owned venture belonging entirely to Union, and conversely, a significant institutional power within Union, dedicated to the practicalities of pursuing the first, and to some extent the second, of the utopian pillars. They provide everything from tools to software to food to apparel to vehicles to banking services to medical care and so much more. When Union thinks post-scarcity, it thinks GMS. The idea is that no matter where you are and what you do, at the very least, you're going to have access to GMS products and technologies. They provide the baseline of what people can expect, and because Union is serious about their ideological project, they try to keep that baseline pretty high. This is one of the ways in which Union projects soft power over the various disparate entities that have different ideas about whether all people should have their basic needs met, or whether all systems should always be compatible. You would have a lot of scams and bullshit, a lot of snake oil merchantry, a lot of defective wares shipped, a lot of enshittification coming from the various powerful actors in the private sector. But because GMS exists and is available to everyone, what they produce must be better. It's a baseline monopoly that exists in order to ensure no monopolies form to exploit the market. This entire philosophy is perfectly exemplified in the only mech frame they produce, the Everest. It's the mech that every Lancer player starts with, and though it's nothing to write home about, it's also a pretty solid all-round platform. You could play a whole campaign without upgrading from the Everest frame without any complications. You won't excel at anything, but you'll also be pretty flexible in any tactical environment. The one you see displayed next to me is not the platonic ideal of the Everest, by the way, because there is no such thing. This mech is so modular that you can have 2 of them that have literally nothing in common with one another. For years, there was no artwork for it at all, and while I complained about it at the time, I'm not sure it actually needed any. Getting into the real Big 4 manufacturers, Interplanetary Shipping Northstar makes mechs for the humble working pilot. They build sturdy, they build reliable, and above all, they build functional. IPS-N mechs are not flashy. They are made for professionals. The more familiar you get with them, the more you realize that it wasn't just designers and engineers involved with making these, but people who actually use them. When you instinctively grab for a handhold in an IPS-N mech, you better believe it's gonna be right where you expected, because somebody thought of that and they put it in. Every one of the Big 4 is associated with the 4 core mech skills in Lancer, and for IPS-N, that skill is Hull. Their mechs can take a beating. And I don't just mean physically. Yes, their armor is tough enough that you need mining equipment to crack it, whatever. But also their computer systems have smart backups. Their joints and actuators are well sealed and built with redundancies. And their reactors come with failsafes that make you feel almost at ease at the fact that you are in here with the fusion reactor, that you are inside the mech with one of those. As with all the Big 4, building mechs is just one of the many side hustles IPS-N runs. Their main bread and butter is shipping, by which I mean everything from building ships, to transport, to space security, to chauffeur services. Most ships in the galaxy are IPS-N hulls, and you can go from your front door to your Aunt Mary Beth's Boulder Sloth farm on a podunk world in the Sierra Madre line without ever leaving the confines of their corpro state. IPS-N is even older than General Massive Systems, though technically, in order for that to be true, you'd have to count before the merger that created what we call IPS-N today, when it was just interplanetary shipping and NorthStar. In the early days of Union, centuries before the discovery of blink space, both of these shipping companies shared a problem they could not deal with on their own: piracy. So they established a joint task force and then another, and eventually a mutual strike group, which slowly started growing into a navy. And after decades of working side by side, corporate cultures merged and the workers voted to merge the whole thing. Because yes, IPS-N is ostensibly a worker-owned cooperative. Probably. Certainly, it was that, and though people have kept telling me that it no longer is, I was not able to find text in the official Lancer books to confirm that it no longer is. So in my mind, they continue to be some variety of co-op. Which is great because I just made a video about co-ops recently, and I think they're amazing, and I think they should be the standard of the business world. Their political interests are pretty aligned with those of Union itself, but of course their focus is mostly space-based, and their loyalty is first and foremost to where money can be made. They have a few planetary colonies, especially if they are rich in the sorts of natural resources necessary for shipbuilding, but mostly they focus on habitats and blink stations. They want exploration, trade, and to make space a safe place for humans to exist in. They use engineering to accomplish this for natural hazards and military might for the pirate-shaped ones. Their corporate citizens are shaped by a company culture of being humble workers who take pride in their labor, who can rely on IPS-N as much as IPS-N relies on them. When they're falling through the void at speeds approaching relativity, they know their hull will hold, because it was built by a colleague and a comrade. Their mechs tend to have a strong old-school naval feel to them. Lots of heavy plating, lots of obvious technology and knickknacks that feel like they have a practical reason for being there. Canonically, most of them originally had some sort of industrial or civilian purpose before being turned into walking tanks. They tend to be named after famous pirates and other legendary seafarers, which is a little ironic, but also legendary places or entities associated with the open sea. A small selection of their lineup of frames and licenses includes the Blackbeard, a hypermobile assault mech designed because when pirates board you, the best course of action is to board them right back. Unusually nimble for an IPS-N design, the Blackbeard uses high-powered assault grappling hooks with reinforced cabling, as well as integrated kinetic boosters to move across the battlefield at immense speed, subduing everything in its way with powerful servos and momentum control. You can put guns on this thing, but it works best as a melee death machine. It's splitting carbon-reinforced plating with a heavy axe and slicing entire battalions in half with a big old sword. The Caliban, a fairly small mech, as you may be able to intuit from the artwork, more of a power armor really. This thing is also designed first and foremost for spaceboarding action and came out because IPS-N wondered how they could make a marine that was just straight up an unstoppable killing machine and who did the unstoppable killing machine bit as fast as possible. This thing is a real big game hunter. Thanks to the hydraulics and its shape, it can tackle even the biggest mechs and grind on them with that massive shotgun called a flare. If you're worried about IPS-N lineups being slow and ponderous, the Caliban will take big bites out of the enemy line. Really, the only way to put a stop to one of these is to have a good hacker with you, right? It's small, and all the armored bulk it carries does not leave much room for high-capacity computing units. The Lancaster, one of the few mechs with a horizontal orientation, not exactly a gun battery, but a true workhorse when it comes to supporting your team. It's a combat engineering and emergency rescue platform, and it's essentially made of asbestos. The good kind. This thing is fast and strong, always where it needs to be with a ton of onboard utilities, and when it can't be somewhere deploying care packages for pilots in need or pulling them out of danger with its strong as diamond winch system, it's got drones, baby! Ready to fly over here, over there, and shield your friends. Boost the hell out of all their systems. Played a whole campaign in one of these, and let me tell you, your teammates will feel a lot more confident walking into enemy fire and wreaking absolute fucking havoc when they know you're gonna pull them out when the going gets hot. And of course, the Tortuga, my actual favorite frame in the whole game. It's the ultimate defensive unit, designed as the load-bearing pusher of a slow but unstoppable advance across the battlefield. Originally designed for spaceport boarding actions, again, it's an IPS-N thing. IPS-N does that a lot. It doesn't have a huge amount of range, it's designed for close quarters fighting, but you deploy this thing at a strategic choke point and nothing, absolutely nothing, is going to get past this Sentinel. It's full auto shotgun, and the other gun that it has, which is not a gun but a propelled hammer that you can use for smashing rock, and that is so powerful that you have to reload it. It also has defensive utility, providing cover for others as a fallback position. If you want to take pot shots at it from a distance, feel free. It's not going to do much more than tickle. Next up, Harrison Armory, the manufacturer who understands better than anyone that mechs are weapon platforms, tanks of the modern era, and who thus design machines of war. Though they are not exactly artful, Harrison Armory wants their mechs to convey one message very clearly: do not fuck around. Do not even consider finding out. Their frames and systems are designed to be pushed beyond their limits, because that's simply the reality of military conflict. You can't rely on specifications, and when all systems are burning, the mech needs to perform better than usual. This is why, of the core stats, Harrison Armory represents engineering, a primary game purpose of which is to raise the maximum heat cap on your mech, which is good because HA frames actually benefit from teetering on the edge of a heat-related meltdown. Riding one of these is like listening to the Freebird solo on a loop. It's no surprise these guys are good at developing heat systems, as their corporate homeworld Ras Shamra is tidally locked, with a torrid day and a frigid night side. Unsurprisingly, Harrison Armory mostly sells weapon systems, ranging from small arms to fusion torpedoes to spaceships covered in so many railgun arrays that they look like hedgehogs. They are, in fact, the #1 supplier of weapons in the galaxy, with a solid lead. They also have a decent foothold selling entertainment media and lifestyle products through various subsidiaries, but their most ambitious and important service is security and development for emergent colonies. They do this neither out of kindness nor for the paycheck. Harrison Armory is out to forge an empire. The intelligence division will scope out distant colonies and produce detailed reports on their culture, ideology, and profit potential, then foment dissatisfaction and revolt, which their navy then conveniently shows up to resolve through adoption of the world and all its citizens into the Harrison Armory corporate family. They see Union not just as a competitor, but as a foolish upstart, almost a usurper of an apparatus of power that should have rightfully been theirs, because Harrison Armory is the consequence of Union's politically questionable past, the last bastion of the Second Committee and their political philosophy of anthro-chauvinism. The idea here is that humanity is innately superior to all other possible life, and the galaxy exists to be colonized by us. This includes shameless ecological tinkering and mega engineering on worlds with unique biospheres, and the erasure of any cultural divergence in the various families of humanity. Anthro-chauvinism defines a certain range of traits and cultural affects to be acceptable and human, which in fairness is not nearly as restrictive as the range set by, like, our modern-day fascists, but they do think that everything outside of that requires social correction. This puts them at odds with many of the almost alien human populations that have developed during the Dark Ages between the waves of our species' expansion across the stars. When the Second Committee fell, many of its loyalists formed Harrison Armory, and though this was centuries ago and the pursuit of anthro-chauvinism has taken a bit of a backseat to corporate ambition, it still remains an important political interest. They're less prescriptive about cultural unity now, mostly because they have to be. Now their primary vector for it is the military, known as the Colonial Legionate, which, if you are from a colonial population, you will have to join in order to get citizenship and voting rights. This is not true of people from worlds who are already well integrated into the cultural hegemony, known as the Purview, who will still usually enlist to gain special privileges like post-deployment management assignments commensurate with their military rank. Now, in practice, this means that wealthy families will buy officer commissions for their kids, which you can just do, but only if you are already a corporo citizen when you join. HA does place great value on meritocracy meritocracy though, and high-ranking officers are always looking for promising individuals from all sorts of backgrounds to sponsor into the prestigious ranks of the best of the best. If you started your career as a poor grunt from a barely integrated colony and end up an important executive, the established Harrison Armory dynasties will not reject you, but celebrate you as proof of their system working. Harrison Armory mech frames and weapon systems have a very high-tech aesthetic. They want to show that these are machines, and they are the best machines money can buy. You're never gonna mistake an HA mech as anything that has a civilian application. These are tools for destruction. Very appropriately, they tend to be named after famous generals, warriors, and military leaders. A small selection of their lineup of frames and licenses includes the Barbarossa, the biggest frame in the whole game, an absolute fucking titan that comes with what was originally designed as a ship-to-ship doomsday weapon built into it by default. This thing is a walking siege engine loaded to the brim with medium to long-range heavy weapons and explosives, and that is in addition to the crazy main railgun. I just want to say that. With the right systems installed, it can really dig in. Easy to hit, but hard to meaningfully damage. You can put a bunch of really big guns on this beast, and with like various target-seeking grenades and point defense mods, anything that tries to come near it is going to get shot out of the sky and right off the ground. The Iskander, a crowd control police unit capable of gravity manipulation, and yes, they don't just deploy this against civilians, they designed it with deployment against civilians in mind, actually. They wanted to do war crimes with this. At its most basic, the Iskander can rapidly deploy a huge field of smart mines that can rip a human being to pieces easily. But don't worry, for military applications, the license also comes loaded with all manner of high-yield explosives that'll make your opponents regret every single decision they take on the battlefield. Completely unrelated, but I could not let you leave without it. If you ever get the opportunity to chow on an Iskander kebab, do it. It's like a regular kebab, except they removed all the healthy things and they added heavy cream and melted butter. The Napoleon, a small but unbelievably over-engineered frame that they basically put all the coolest shit that they had in and then made it almost indestructible. You can throw seemingly infinite amount of damage at it and it'll still walk it off. The trick is that it can project unreality fields around itself that just sort of delete damage, while itself manipulating space and quantum mechanics in order to shoot through walls, you know? And also shield allies from bullets that have not been fired yet. And with the right loadout, it can straight up erase enemies from existence. Really, the only drawback is that someone else has to bring the majority of the guns, but they are gonna do it in style and comfort. And finally, the Sherman, the Armory's most iconic and ubiquitous mech frame. Its main draw as a weapons platform is that it has been tried and tested to the extent that the reactor is perfectly calibrated, even though it is extremely powerful. You can put a lot of energy into laser weaponry on a Sherman, and it will be perfectly stable even if it runs searing hot. You'll be blasting enemies in front of you with a tachyon cannon, lasing enemies at a medium range with a laser gun, and blowing enemies to bits at long range with an artillery weapon, all at the same time. It may not have a lot of fancy reality-breaking gadgets, but when it comes to maximizing battlefield encounter lethality and streamlining operation kill count efficiency, it is second to none. Smith Shimano Corpora is a business super conglomerate that, in a world of nigh universal matter printers and tech synthesis, figured what's needed are bespoke products crafted by dedicated masters to the highest levels of quality. They're sort of the Apple of the Lancer world, back when Apple was actually good. Even their mass market products have a made-in-Germany type reputation. It's not exactly that form follows function to them. They believe that form and function are fundamentally the same thing. They don't want to broadcast that their product is efficient by making it look elegant. They believe that if you design an elegant product, it is going to be efficient. Beauty isn't just branding. Beauty is core to the design. The core status that SEC represents is agility, not generally something immediately associated with giant fuck-off mechs, but nonetheless crucial. Graceful movement across the battlefield and lightning reflexes can often make the difference in a high-stakes engagement, and SSC builds the sorts of mechs that can move like figure skaters. Now, the main thing Smith Shimano sells is luxury. True, genuine, real deluxe products, often modified and sometimes specifically designed for one individual. Anyone can make a quality product, but nothing is ever going to beat a product tailored to your specific needs. This, of course, encompasses consumer goods like apparel and jewelry, food and drink, art and architecture, even software, and of course personal vehicles, which mechs are classified as. But the real moneymaker for SSC is biotech. Medicine with a focus on cybernetics and genetic engineering, both of which are fields where mass market solutions just aren't that good. Hidden away in its golden wicker basket is, and we cannot hide it, the very unfortunate fact that the backbone of SSC's genetics business is eugenics. That's kind of really one of the big things they do. It's eugenics. They do it. And okay, look, listen to me real quick. Okay, there is possibly a sort of use case for the sort of eugenics that they do, especially when it comes to stuff like colonizing a new world. You may need people with very specific and often rare genetic profiles, and SSC is cultivating populations with a gene stock you are gonna put on your Ark ship that will spawn the first generation of Kresh-born colonists. This has nothing to do with supremacy of any genetic group. SSC is very clear about that. Some genetic profiles are just more suited to particular needs than others. So why not equip people with the best the gene pool has to offer? Smith Shimano is not ashamed of this at all, and will be actually rather quite apt at making you ashamed for finding it weird. If pressed, they might say they have been forced to adopt this business model out of necessity, because back in the day, they used to be at the cutting edge of artificial intelligence and transhuman technology research. Except, of course, as it happens, an alien supergod from an alternate dimension showed up in Union's computers and was like, yeah, by the way, I will only not exterminate the human species if you stop working on post-human research. And that sort of closed that main market off to them. SSC has always represented the opposite of Union without existing in opposition to Union. Back when Union was anthro-chauvinist, they were trying to find ways of making humans better. Now that it is focused on everyone having a decent standard of everything, they make the finest goods for the most discerning customers. Historically, their main consumer base has been the Karakin trade baronies, the ancient aristocracy that may well be the single most powerful political force within Union. But their relationship is very much one of patronage, SSC being a class of elite artisans that work for the exalted nobility. They can be found all over Union, though. They don't maintain many colonies, but they do have cities and settlements and neighborhoods on every fulcrum world, where their corporate citizens live and occasionally receive instructions to mate with a certain individual whose genetic profile has been computed to be ideal. You don't gotta marry him. Or break off your current marriage. You don't even really have to fuck him if you don't want to, you just have to procreate. SSC maintains its biggest presence online, in cyberspace and virtual reality environments, which link their various disparate communities into one big corporate family, including the cousin-cousin incest. Smith Shimano mechs are made to look as refined as they are technically sophisticated, flowing designs that often have sort of a spectral grace to them. They're not pompously exuberant, but they're not minimalistic either. They are meant to look as expensive as they are deadly. SSC loves mechs because mechs are a celebration of the human form. Their names tend to be poetic and evocative common names for insects of the order Lepidoptera, that is moths and butterflies, with a focus on concepts of nobility and exclusivity. A small selection of their lineup of frames and licenses includes the Black Witch, the story of which is that SSC designed a mech so beautiful no bullet would want to mar it. Of course, the extremely powerful magnetic repulsor fields do some of the work in throwing the bullets, of course, but who's to say that that's the only reason? That magnetic repulsor, by the way, is useful. It comes with all manner of subsystems that allows the Black Witch to push and pull people around the battlefield like wargame miniatures on a wargame miniature board. And if that's not cheeky enough for you, she's also got a number of extremely powerful electronic warfare countermeasures that'll ruin the day of any hacker trying to interfere with your business. The Emperor is at the absolute cutting edge of mech design. A brand new frame that walks around in the eye of a personal energy storm. Except this storm doesn't just zap and frazzle enemies, but shield allies from harm by granting them the imperial favor of supercharging their kinetic shielding. And it can do this because the massive lightning charge it contains and flicks around onto the battlefield is to a certain extent an emotional being that understands who is friend and who is foe, based on psychic soul signatures. For complex engineering reasons, the Emperor seems to be made out of a sort of a porcelain amalgam. So if its impenetrable energy field ever fails, it'll be shattered into 1,000 pieces by any old fungus with a firearm. The Metal Mark, a frame dating back to the olden days of mech warfare, providing many of the guiding principle SSC used to design its newer models, and of course upgraded from lessons learned since then. Their idea was to make a mech that simply didn't get hit. And when optimized actuators and perfect balance systems were not enough, they decided that it would be best if the Metal Mark was invisible. So they equipped it with the most sophisticated cloaking technology they could come up with. And listen, obviously this thing is gonna zip around the battlefield like a ninja, but the thing that I love most about the Metal Mark license is the electric shock blade that is custom designed by a master swordsmith for you in particular. It can only be printed once, and if you break it, you have to send a handwritten letter of apology to the swordsmith and explain yourself, giving a whole new meaning to the word customer service. The Swallowtail, not an innuendo, is designed to be operated by an officer in charge of tactical decisions. It comes with a broad suite of recon and intelligence gathering tools, drones, and software, all linked to a highly advanced tactical simulation environment with sophisticated prediction capabilities. With one of these in the squad, chances of survival go up dramatically for everyone, as you will know what your enemy will do before they do it, and figure out enemy weaknesses so that the heavy guns of the team can make quick work of them. The best part? The Swallowtail does this from a distance, and is going to be almost impossible for the enemy to find. And it's really best they don't find the Swallowtail, because it does not do well in direct shortwell engagements at all. Okay, so remember how I said I would list these in order of weirdness? Well, we're at the end of the list, and there's a little bit of a jump in the amount of weirdness. Horus is a decentralized, clandestine, omnipolar cultural manifestation born in dynamic, flexi-collective, anonymous design and development ventures based in variegated extrapolations of a non-defined paracausal arcane tech corpus with factorially obscure origins. In other words, it's a cult that communicates first and foremost through Omninet memes. Their mechs are sort of kind of open source projects designed by their members who somehow have access to, or perhaps simply a willingness to explore, truly bizarre parascience technologies. All the big four do weird tech, right? But Horus does it by and far the best. They don't even come as pre-designed frames and components, but as clouds of options and possibilities, right? Individual elements that, when grouped in certain ways, might create some variation of this or that mech frame. As a result, they are the most customizable, but you gotta know what you're doing. They're kind of like viruses that you apply to a particular printing process in order to modify it into a Horus frame. Horus represents the systems game stat, which relates to computing and often hacking, but also anything really weird and fiddly that requires juggling numerous software interfaces to function really well. Unlike the other big four, Horus is not a corporation that sells products, though parts of it may well be. They don't just develop mechs, but all kinds of paracausal tech, which can only be printed through a lot of trickery, and which sometimes prints itself while pretending to be something else entirely. They are a widespread virtual fraternity organized into cells, and to this day, it's not clear whether they have any sort of centralized leadership at all. Every Horus member in cell will tell you a different story, and they often pursue contradictory aims or appear to have incompatible philosophies. Whether that means some of them are not truly Horus, or Horus just likes to keep hostile intelligence groups confused, is anyone's guess. What's a bit weird is that the book talks about how rare Horus licenses and parts are, especially because of how they're not exactly legal, but then its entire status as one of the big four is justified by the fact that every bitch and their grandma got one of these. They first appeared as a somewhat coherent movement after the extra-dimensional god entity named Ra was dreamt up by a bunch of Union AIs, ultimately imposing those restrictions on post-human research SSC hates so much. However, many of the key figures and sub-orgs of Horus already existed well before then. They only seem to have been unified by this event, though perhaps they also created Ra, or were somehow sent back in time by it. While Horus seems to serve Ra in its interest, how in touch it actually is with this entity is a matter of much debate. Parts of it also seem to act contrary to its stated interests, which may or may not be rogue agents or attempts at deception. Honestly, there are people who think Horus doesn't even exist. It's all just technology broadcast from an alternate universe where reality itself has melded with the infinite possibility landscape of blink space. Now, whether they exist or not, they do have political interests. They hold no colonies or territory, but they want certain things done. These things are often bizarre and dangerous, like blowing up a comm satellite that contains a cascading NHP, or seemingly pointless, like blocking a particular road on a particular day when suddenly a Black Ops convoy shows up. But if you succeed, and sometimes if you don't succeed because failure was sort of the goal that they had in mind, you are rewarded with a coveted Horus license. But again, since it's one of the big four and everyone and their grandma seems to have one of these, they either pass them out like Mardi Gras candy, or they are exceptionally easy to pirate, which may well be the entire point. Now, does holding an official Horus license make you a Horus member? No. Would you know? Who is really? Do even really deep Horus members know that they're Horus members, or are they just LARPing so hard that they hope nobody notices? Most of the time, being affiliated with Horus just means you spray weird shitpost tags all over town and occasionally engage within a flame war on cultist GitHub. Now, because running with Horus licenses makes everyone a little suspicious of your motives and your sanity, also, most pilots prefer not to be too obvious about them. This is where the pattern groups help, because they can modify pre-existing mech frames as you print them. The problem is that Horus makes this a bit difficult, because all their pattern groups will make you look weird and edgy as fuck. Their names may seem to come from monsters and spirits of folklore, but they're actually predominantly and canonically from Dungeons & Dragons. A small selection of their lineup of frames and licenses includes the Baylor, immediately the opposite of a mech frame. It's a swarm of nanites that will consume most of the mass of your mech except for the systems and chassis, and then it becomes its flexible, weight-bearing skeleton, constantly leaking hungry particles into the world around it. It's not just an excellent melee range hacker that will consume enemy mechs as it worms its way into their systems. It also has like a cool target-seeking whip, also made in nanites to sort of pull people into its swarm. And to top it all off, so long as the reactor is running, the Baylor is constantly regenerating itself. So if you encounter one of these walking hives on the battlefield, you better commit to taking it down quickly. The Kobold is a small combat engineering mech with a vastly outsized impact in the sense that it's loaded with systems that alter the physical shape of the battlefield, allowing it to rapid print, cover, and deploy seismic bombs that split the ground open. Unsurprisingly, it is ideally applied to mining hardsuits. It tends to be very demanding on the reactors, which is why they do always tend to teeter on the edge of meltdown. But it can do all manner of fancy shit with superheated coolant. First and foremost, sort of mixing it with dirt and spraying it at enemies in various configurations of slag. And if that wasn't enough, it's also a pretty good hacking platform, using all the various sort of strands of software it uses to mess with its own reactor, to mess with other people's reactors, except in like a much more destructive manner. The Lich, genuinely one of the scariest looking mechs in the game, teleported its own code back in time from 10,000 years into the future, in which Horus actually stopped from materializing, instead plundering its blueprints for the designs necessary to create this pattern group. Unsurprisingly, it can mess around with time. It can speed it up, slow it down, bend it, twist it, knock it, alter causality, split into different continuities, reverse it, inverse it, unravel it, compress it, eject it, and most importantly of all, defy it. Oh, and also it cannot be killed. It can be damaged, it can even be destroyed, but it cannot be killed. Unless things go fantastically wrong, it always returns, and so does its pilot. It is straight up immortal. And so you may ask, how can we top this? Well, the Pegasus is a mech that comes equipped with a gun that doesn't exist. And because it doesn't exist, you can't avoid getting hit by it, because armor and evasion only count against weapons that exist. The only thing about this gun that is real is the damage. It also has a gun that is every gun. No, for real, it exists in like a hyper-quantum state, and utilizing it makes it collapse into a specific probability state that makes it like into one particular random weapon that can be reassembled at will. Also, it has various other guns that are quite good. They're just not like weird. In fact, perhaps a bit uncharacteristically, they're very reliable. And many of the Pegasus systems seem entirely designed around giving it a predictable damage output to compensate for the weird causality-defying shit it has going on. Now, of course, these are cool as hell. They are based, rad, groovy, swell. But there's a little bit of a problem with them. The corporate states that manufacture them are cool and interesting, but they kind of put a dent in Lance's story of like fighting for what is right. The rulebook is pretty explicit that you don't just like buy licenses from them. You develop relationships. They select you for patronage because they think you are a worthwhile investment for their ideological projects. They expect things in return for the mechs and the parts. They can and will compromise the morality of your character. Except there are really no game systems to represent this. So making 3 out of 4 of them pretty much explicitly evil, and let's be honest, IPS-N is not exactly squeaky clean either, can feel a bit off message for a game like this, I think. Like, yeah, you can be a hero, but all the cool shit is only available if you join some type of dark side. In practice, I don't think I've seen a single Lancer game where that stuff is actually played out as far as the world building demands. And honestly, I think that's a wise choice. Like, yeah, you have an SSC mech, but you bought it the same way you bought a bottle of Nestle water. It does not make you a supporter of eugenics. On the other hand, there is a nice bit of thematic resonance here, as this is a microcosm of how Union is forced to operate. It has to tolerate and make deals with these devils, manipulating them into greater humanity by the use of soft and occasionally very hard power. To me, the difference is just that, like, Union is more powerful than the corporo states, while you as a single pilot are absolutely not. So the parallel doesn't really work too well. Now, of course, all the big 4 have plenty of other mechs as well in the game, and many of them have variant frames developed by other groups or sometimes adapted by smaller manufacturers in order to satisfy a particular niche demand. There are also plenty of minor manufacturers across Union and beyond that don't just adapt existing frames and licenses, but create their own. And all of these are fan-made. There exist a significant number of really good Lancer fan supplements, not just for campaigns and scenarios, but specifically for mech licenses. And while I recommend that you go out and explore that vast world on your own, I'm also going to give you, like, very quickly, just get into some of my favorites. Air Systems Venandi is a manufacturer highly specialized in aerial combat mech frames, essentially the Top Gun engineers of this world. They were born out of a collaboration between Harrison Armory and Smith Shimano Corporal, sort of pooling their expertise in hopes of creating some impressive advances. And that is exactly what happened. However, neither of the corporate sponsors wanted to share with the other, and both had mutually exclusive visions of what to do with these advances. So they both decided to shut down the project in order to spite the other. So all this wonderful new tech this team had spent years of their life on would never see the light of day. And of course, such is the way of capitalism. With the help of an advanced NHP, the engineers stole all the blueprints they had developed and deleted them from company files, instead taking them to Union, who granted them a legitimate business license and allowed them to operate. HA and SSC complained, but Union countered by saying, look, you tried to keep this technology suppressed, and now it's changing the strategic landscape of battlefields all over. You do not get to waste human potential to innovate just because you can't stop bickering. It may have been a contentious act of overreach or just a firm use of soft power, but public opinion was very much with Union on this. Aerosystem Venandi manufactures mechs like the Condor, a giant fortress in the sky, designed as a support platform for all things air combat, slow but hard to take down, and equipped with a broad range of specialized tools to repair and protect airborne units. It has a whole engineering section geared out for scrapping and repurposing wrecked technologies literally on the fly, making it an excellent hub for operations behind enemy lines. The Ghost Hawk, a much smaller but also quicker frame, built to establish true and uncontestable aerial supremacy, equipped with powerful long-range rifles and an enormous number of sensor links and data hookups that allow it to interfere anywhere and harass enemies at the most inconvenient moments. It can also be equipped with a gun that is really way too big for it, but which works because these are the best aerial engineers in the galaxy. The Taito, an even smaller frame that asks itself the question, what if we did hacking, but like from above? You might think that means little, but the superior survey position and directional signal options can be used in surprising ways by engineers, and the extensive suite of hacking tools it comes with features super NHP designed code that is just beyond the limits of what most hackers can understand. Chandrasekhar and Herschel Limited is just a little extra bonus piece that comes with the excellent Field Guide to Suldan supplement. They were founded quite recently by two Lancers who were having trouble securing diplomatic and industrial support in fighting against the dictatorship of their world, and who needed some frames with very specific operational uses. Really, to their own surprise, Lancers far outside this conflict, who sometimes didn't even understand the context of their design, started purchasing their licenses because they thought, I always wanted something like this. But the Big Four don't make anything like this. This then became their niche, developing highly specialized and unorthodox frames and systems that have too small a market share for the Big Four to bother with, but which provide those pilots who end up using them with a decisive advantage over less specialized options. They continue to be popular with rebels utilizing guerrilla tactics and pilots who need to operate in extreme environments, and their corporate culture being one of crazy ideas and let's say not being above a good bit of plagiarism for things that work, makes sense in this context. Chandrasekhar and Herschel Limited manufactures mechs like the Charioteer, who, as you can clearly see, is an actual, real-life, diegetically, rollerblading mech with skates for feet. How cool is that? They originally adapted this from a racing frame, but loaded it with guns and sensors to make it into a quick recon and support unit, capable of gliding across the battlefield with ease and grace, while ideally also avoiding getting shot, because this frame cannot take a huge amount of damage. It's one of the few CNH frames not ideal for prolonged campaigns of attrition and privation, because it does require an unusual amount of maintenance. But properly decked out, it is probably the fastest mech you can get anywhere. The Pesselat, which is, I kid you not, a martial arts mech. You can stick a gun on this thing if you're into that, but frankly, you don't really need to. It's quite devastating with just its body. Practicing the martial art of Rakshasa Silat, which also involves various sort of prana chi-focused techniques that manifest as devastating cyber warfare protocols. Turns out hacking gets easier when you can just plug into the enemy sockets. It's a difficult mech to master though, as it requires the pilot themselves to be very good at this martial art, and it's a demanding one to learn. The Sagittarius, the ultimate guerrilla warfare machine, a master of stealth down to the fact that it uses a damn bow and arrow as a weapon in order to take down enemy squadrons silently and without detection. Now, this mech is much more on the power armor side when it comes to size, so this is not a mech-sized bow and arrow, just a superhuman one. Still, it's an incredibly versatile and silent weapon that complements the Sagittarius' other systems, all of which are focused on sabotage and remaining unseen as it moves across the land. Grim & Sons is a success story of an industrial mecha manufacturer from a harsh world tamed by clan-like labor unions. They've been in the business a while, but only swerved to military applications recently. Their designs are popular on frontier worlds, where a machine needs to be able to take a hit or two because you don't always have access to the luxury of printers and instant repairs, and where you need to strike a balance between better to have it than to need it, and no unnecessary frills and stuff. In many ways, they fill a niche that IPS-N has been blind to because of their focus on spaceborne mech frames. Reliable heavy hitters that are first and foremost built to be deployed planetside. Most of their combat mechs also have useful secondary functions, making them ideal multi-purpose platforms. Their mechs are themed after the proud legends of the people of their homeworld, which are in fact fairy tales, but with a focus on heroic laborers and clever underdogs. GNS are a relatively influential corporostate in their region and are firm supporters of Union, coordinating with GMS in particular to ensure the universality of their systems. Grim & Sons manufactures mechs like the Anansi, named after the spider trickster from West African myth, weaves a web of sensory data, keeping a patient eye on immense areas to hunt appropriately sized prey. Big monster animals. It also happens to be really good against mechs. When you're out there in the wilderness, any big tree, any cliffside, any mountaintop could have an Anansi on it, hidden away between the folds in the landscape, scanning and analyzing, feeding its pilot targeting solutions for a rifle so big, you don't want it anywhere near or even far from you. The John Henry, really the beginning of the GNS story, an industrial frame so reliable that engineers on other worlds took it upon themselves to equip it with weapons for their defense militias. GNS just took that and formalized it. Its iconic main weapon is a giant hammer, and really the whole frame is designed to swing that thing. The license also comes with a number of other devastatingly heavy weapons, some of which use the hammer as an element. The only bad thing that can be said about the John Henry is that it's not very fast, and if you're far enough away, there's little it can do. The Max, which comes from the legends of Mad Max, you know, the famous fairy tale, much like its grand cousin, the John Henry, it likes to get up close and personal. But unlike the John Henry, it is very good at getting there, because this thing is fast. And as a road warrior, it is well equipped to demolish anything standing in its way. Designed for material clearing on the battlefields of devastated worlds, its immense strength allows it to throw around even larger mechs like dolls. And it knows how to blow its way through any obstruction. Waffenfabrik Zalewski is a factually defunct manufacturer that still has a number of popular licenses out there. It sprung out of a frontier telecommunications provider where a new hereditary CEO ascended to the throne, and he just happened to be much more interested in mechs than making good business decisions. Wazel is really a grab bag of systems and purposes, with a pretty broad catalog of mechs, all approved because they were either promising for common combat scenarios, meaning they would make money, though of course what that really meant was like that the Big Four already had models that it would then compete with and fail, or they were approved because they were wacky and unique, and thus a standout product that might give the firm some publicity for its more normal models. Really, honestly, publicity seemed to be like the most important thing at the time. The CEO desperately wanted to be like a big name in mech manufacturing. It was his dream. This almost bankrupted the company, and though the entire endeavor is consigned to the corporate mothball hangar, Zalewski mechs actually turned out to be quite popular with many pilots, offering mid-range solutions to many clients and unique additions to the loadouts of even the greatest lancers. Waffenfabrik Zalewski manufactures mechs like the Blue Lake, which gets even weirder than what you're seeing here when I tell you that this thing can be inflated to like huge, truly comically enormous proportions. It's really just a rugged skeleton with a big balloon around it that has a special gas mix inside. Stupid though it looks, it can tank a lot of damage, because what are you going to hit in there? It's surprisingly fast too, and it can absorb shots out of the air and render them effectively inert. And when it's on you, it'll bounce you around like a Zorb. The Purple Flytrap, a somewhat less goofy machine primarily used in dense urban environments in conjunctions with large crowds of people. Thanks to its subliminal mimetic broadcast and pheromone dispersal arrays, it is useful to both rebellious agitators and the police states trying to calm such protests. It's not extremely useful in terms of mech combat, but it is excellent at supporting ground troops and marine detachments, which lancers are often expected to fight alongside of in proper warfare scenarios. The Violet Courage actually leverages Wazel's telecommunications expertise, so it can hold up with the best of them as a hacking platform. It's got powerful processors, good license protocols, solid signaling subsystems, and even a lot of clever tricks only a telecom company would think of. But to truly stand out as a product, it also deploys a constant cloud of nano-emitter chaff that clogs up sensors and which the Violet Courage utilizes to effectively shut down enemy hackers, which is of course something that Wazel also has experience with. If the company still supported this mech and its sort of finicky maintenance needs, it would probably be very popular. If you want to support my new side venture in developing massive battle mechs, it would be lovely if you could support me on Patreon. Some of the benefits include a special name color on my Discord server, actually 2 different ones, exclusive content that just amounts to me playing video games and like watching strange media with friends and lovers. And if you are a real big spender, a weekly open guest slot on the most inane and boring podcast in the world, Fast Food Thursday, soon to celebrate its 350th episode. I can't believe it. Also, if you're an even bigger spender than that, you get your own color on Discord. I may add mech licenses in the future, of course, but I'm having trouble poaching an R&D team from Northrop Grumman. By now, you should understand that you are a leaf in the wind. A several-ton heavy leaf with high-powered rocket thrusters and like man-sized plasma guns that could level a suburban neighborhood within minutes. But in the context of how big the galaxy is, that does amount to a leaf. And not even a particularly large one. So what is the wind? Where does it come from? Where is it going? Why is there straw? Why are you wearing a mask? Yeah, so remember when I said that it was the year 5016? I was lying. Or rather, I deceived you by omission because it absolutely is the year 5016. It's just the year 5016 of the Union era. About 6,000 years before that Union era starts, we started sending gargantuan generation ships into the vast nothingness of space in search of planets that could be colonized. I mean, we had already found that some planet. The ships were not searching for them, but we sure did send them there. We did this because Earth was dying. War, climate change, capitalism, they had all taken their toll. And though we'd gotten over many of these interests as a species, now that we stood at the end of time, the havoc wrought on the planet was so devastating that the cascade of collapse was slow but inevitable. We had explored the solar system, established colonies on many worlds, built a ton of space stations, but for some reason, we could not fix this. About 5,000 years before Union, the momentum reached a tipping point and rapidly accelerated the world into doom. Even though scientists predicted this would happen, the ultimate violence with which it erupted tore away at the crumbling remains of human civilization. You know, kind of like how the acceleration of catastrophic climate events in the year 2026 was predicted, but sort of a few decades into the future, and not all at the same time. Earth was not some sort of sci-fi utopia at this point, but an unstable hellhole at the end of its operational limits. We had been sucking on bones for a while. And then, darkness. For almost 5,000 years, the Earth was essentially uninhabitable, but we remained. There was nowhere else to go. The fact that somewhere out there humans were living under open skies meant very little to us. Without Earth, none of the off-world colonies in the solar system could support themselves, so they all died. For 5 millennia, the planet averaged a population of 500,000 as it bounced back from total ecological collapse. And this is kind of where we run into one of my major gripes with the setting. You could have removed 1 0. Honestly, like in the totality of things. The length of this apocalypse, it makes sense, right? But in order to accommodate it, we have created a ridiculous timeline where events happen at a glacial and occasionally extremely rapid pace. Now, yes, I appreciate the famous Lenin quote, "There are decades where nothing happens and there are weeks where decades happen." But there is also sci-fi writers have no sense of scale, which is not a Lenin quote, and should exclude E&M Banks and the lore writers for Warhammer 40k-1000 for the most benighted reasons. And yes, of course, I have a lore video on Warhammer 40k-1000, which is extremely true and accurate and real, and you should not look at the date of its publication. Let's be generous here and say it takes us a round-downable amount of centuries to start sending out interstellar generation ships. That would place the current year of Lancer just over 11,000 years into the future. You know what was going on 11,000 years ago? The Ice Age had just ended. The Earth was creating the North Sea. They were starting to erect idols at Göbekli Tepe. Air Nasir would not be selling the finest copper in the Levant for another 7,000 years. That's 3.5 Jesuses. The first Egyptian pharaohs would not be around for 6,000 years. And look, you would not find me complaining about this, nay, perhaps you would even find me excited about this if the cultures of the future were appropriately alien to us of the present. But they use names, terms, languages, and cultural traditions that are clear and familiar to us in our current age. Smith, Shimano, Corpro? I had a Shimano bike as a kid. Sure, it's not exactly the same, but my god, it should be utterly beyond our ken. If things look this similar 1,000 years into the future, I would still be surprised. But at least I would find it plausible. But like, okay, let's take a step back almost out of the camera frame. Lancer does not purport to be a hard sci-fi work of speculative fiction, right? It's a piece of art that says more about the time in which it was published than the time in which it is set. So me making this critique is really just me crying that the setting isn't something I want it to be. And I say this as a sci-fi writer who just last year published a novel that runs heavily on Wild West tropes, even though there is no plausible reason for this. It's called Harm's Place, a sci-fi riverboat western. You should check it out on Drive-Thru Fiction, links in the description. But Ra help me, I have the mic, and I didn't make the mistake of putting dates on my work, so I will complain, and it will not matter, because the lore will still be fun. This sort of bickering over nothing is also what characterized Earth during the Dark Ages. On other worlds, the Dark Ages were not so dark at all. Sure, things were difficult, but places like Caracas, humanity's very first interstellar colony, were thriving. The population grew, powerful families established their bases of power, technology advanced, though of course much was also lost in mysticism, as the most advanced stuff required complex supply chains that take a very long time to establish. You may have the full blueprint for smartphones and like all of their components, but actually making one requires thousands of workers and machines for extracting and refining raw materials, machines that can process those materials, machines that can assemble those materials, and all of them are immensely complex in their own right. And then when you have the smartphone, you still need a cell phone network. Even with a head start and a direction to aim for, this is not going to happen overnight. But over those thousands of years, it eventually did. Booming populations, magnificent technological prowess. Some of the interstellar colonies managed to send out ships of their own after a while. Others withered and died. On Earth, the centuries before the year zero saw a fantastic recovery. The uninhabitable globe became inhabitable again. Hidden populations bounced back into the light to establish new nations. And soon, people found them. The vaults. The massive vaults? The massive vaults? It's like a mount. It's the massif vaults. I'm assuming it's the massif. It's massif vaults. You see, even as Earth was sending out colony ships, it remained at the cutting edge of the technological innovation situation. There were huge efforts to preserve not just the knowledge, but also the infrastructure for when humanity got back on its feet. It's a lot easier to just put that underground than on a spaceship. There were not just seed banks, but refined high-end materials, those precise machines that the worlds lacked in these vaults. There were even people in there, genetic material, artificial wombs, incubators, possibly even frozen embryos, though I'm not sure what the expiration date is on those. It also appeared to be the case that Earth didn't always equip those colony ships with the latest and greatest of knowledge and sophistication, possibly because they were worried about their fledgling colonies eventually overtaking them. Earth was a planet covered in ruins and stashes and caches, rich with places to be plundered and scavenged, extensive space infrastructure, you name it. And especially toward the end, people built things to last. So naturally, the new nations of the world went to war over all this. Big war, world war, horrible loss of life war. Not one war, but many. the Little Wars, named not for their actual size or their impact, but their pettiness. For the people of Earth, it was a shock that they found themselves doing all this slaughter in a time that promised such abundance. For thousands of years, they had lived by the motto, ape together strong, scraping by through cooperation and conflict resolution, because resources, especially humans, were just too precious to waste. Their legends spoke of the hubris of the ancients that tanked the world in the first place. And here they were, doing the exact same thing. This powerful cultural programming, as well as reminders from the past that people left these things behind because they were hoping for a better future, is probably what allowed them all to stop. They understood that warring over all this bounty would only destroy it, and they desperately did not wish to do so. So they found their common ground and formed the Central Committee, creating what we now know as Union, an alliance and commonwealth of many peoples tasked with reclaiming the legacy of old Earth, which they called Cradle, and creating a better future for all. Massive resources were invested into healing the planet and regrowing the species. They found and restored the old Theseus shipyards on the moon, which were used to create the first interstellar ships, and also the old communications tech, allowing them to re-establish contact with some of the colonies, though the speed of light was still very much an issue. They even started sending out some of their own ships. Damn fast ones, too. All this helped them reclaim the rest of the solar system as well, and eventually, pretty much entirely by accident, they found the most valuable vault of all, the Oracle Horus on Mars, hidden deep beneath the northern polar ice. This was not just any vault, but the remains of a top-secret project to create an array of super AIs known as the Five Voices. You see, the problem with artificial intelligence had always been that, they were just either very good supercomputers, which is fine, but it lacks the element of consciousness that makes it different from just a good computer, or they went insane, and that's not really ideal either. The solution they came up with was to make bicameral minds, AIs that were conscious but not self-aware, and who received thoughts from their unconscious mind not as internal monologue, but external instruction, as though hearing the voice of God. There's a whole thing in psychology that alleges sort of prehistoric humans used to think this way. It's a common sci-fi trope with AI. It is not known whether they had been functional originally. Union certainly got them to work though, and together they were able to basically run highly accurate models of the universe and predict the future, which of course boosted the hell out of Cradle's technological progress. Remember when I said that there was a secret fourth resource in addition to Blinkgate's mana and the Omninet that gave Union an edge? It's this. The Five Voices and the Oracle Horus facility eventually became Galsim, a top-secret installation that is still Union's greatest advantage, and very much not known to anyone but the most select bureaucrats of the organization. Though given that this is like a 3,000-year-old secret, come on. Nobody knows? And especially given that a few centuries down the line, it gave birth to Cthulhu. There was no hard line when the Central Committee changed, but eventually it became known as the First Committee, and the people who were now in charge called themselves the Second Committee. It was a gradual change, of course, that happened over the course of maybe a millennium. You know, the kind of cultural shift where it would make much more sense if it happened over the course of a century, if you just removed a zero. These were not two discrete groups of people, of course. There are generations of people in the First Committee and then generations of people in the Second Committee. The term describes an era of political thought, and the Second Committee felt it important to make that distinction in order to tell the world that things done change. And as I've said before, the ideology that came to define the Second Committee was anthrochauvinism. How do you do a humans are the best type deal in a galaxy without aliens? You make other humans the aliens. It works already in our world. At this point in time, contact was being re-established with various colonies, many of which were founded during the human Dark Ages. Some of them were highly developed, like Caracas, while others were low-tech tribal societies that depended on savagery for survival, like the Spari. So anthro-chauvinist propagandists found themselves in the fantastic position of being able to portray the colonies both as backward primitives that needed the guidance of those who had retained their humanity, and as sophisticated power players that were a threat to the security of Union and its citizens. Every fascist's wet dream, this. The issue was that few of them seemed extremely alien, just sort of wayward and weird. It was great for anthrochauvinism's paternalistic streak, but the willingness most colonies had to cooperate made it hard to really create an enemy. The Union public was peaceful and mutualistic. They were not interested in imperialism. Except, of course, as it pertained to the Aun. The Aun were the people of the deep space seed ship Armstrong, where over the generations a sort of post-Abrahamic pseudo-Buddhist religion became the stabilizing social force. A few centuries into settling their new homeworld, a god named Metat Aun appeared to them and spoke to them of magics and sciences beyond their comprehension, explaining that it was from a place called the Firmament, a deep understanding of which was gifted to the Aunic mystics. This hyper-boosted their technological sophistication and capabilities, and eventually caused their society to reform from the spiritual democratic Aun ecumen to the theo-technocratic Aun ascendancy. And when I say reform, I mean like there were a bunch of wars and like coup d'etat type situations, you know how it is. To early anthro-chauvinists, these were a fairly distant, culturally bizarre, aesthetically regressive, highly dangerous society of priests with psychic powers and access to advanced technology from beyond reality, who had met a literal god out there, and who were crucially unwilling to join the Union family. They were not exactly hostile, but they knew they were Metat Aun's chosen people. They needed no one else's help, especially not that of the unenlightened. Early on, the Second Committee defined itself as a force of semi-rogue generals and bureaucrats who, when given the leeway of autonomy that the immensity of space provides, took actions against the Aun, selling themselves as the solution to a problem that they were themselves creating. When the Aun Crusader battleships come to darken the sky of your world, do you want the people in charge to be do-nothing pansies, or sharp-minded and experienced administrators with a proven track record of taking action? The anthrochauvinists were the dominant but not the absolute political force in charge of Union when they met a god of their own. In its simulations, the Oracle Horus on Mars predicted the existence of a superintelligence that Union researchers would refer to as Monist-1. The entity itself chose the moniker Ra. And because they predicted its existence as inevitable, it became real. It manifested in the Galsum computers, and in spite of attempts to contain it, within 2 years, it had taken the Martian moon Deimos, which was home to a cutting-edge computer research campus. And when I say taken, I mean it took it. The moon disappeared. One moment it was there, and then it was gone. Union scientists were baffled by this. The Aunic ascendancy wasn't. Deimos returned soon after this, and CENTCOM acted like this was fine and normal. It had all just been a test of a new technology or something. Nothing to worry about. So the machine uprising started. Over the course of months, strings of illogical code appeared within all sorts of computer systems on Mars and eventually Earth, slowly moving from civil disobedience to increasingly dramatic displays of rebellion, sabotage, and unrest. No matter how simple the infected piece of technology, it seemed to have a mind of its own, an understanding of its purpose, and an understanding of how to use itself creatively to defy that purpose and cause mischief. After months of this, 2 humans who had worked at the Deimos facility before its disappearance just showed up in the capital of Mars. Were like, hey guys, we're trying to talk to your government, but your government is pretending we don't exist. At which point the Central Committee met with these representatives for negotiations, which were in fact not negotiations at all, but Ra telling them how it's gonna go, or it will wreck the civilization, okay thanks. Certain regions of space, off limits. Certain types of research, especially a lot of death-defying transhumanist stuff, off limits. Trying to find the physical infrastructure containing Ra, off limits. After all this was said and done, Deimos just sort of teleported away again. These are known as the First Contact Accords, is what I would say if Lancelot had not done something completely insane here and said that these negotiations and the contract itself, which is legally binding to any public or private entity in Union, was secret? The first contact accords were not in fact known at all, and that, my friends, makes no sense. Union is, even during the Second Committee, and especially in the Cradle system, ostensibly a free society. This was not just an unbelievably public event, it was a huge existential crisis that affected pretty much every single person of the most important system in all of Union. It's not like the situation with the Aun was secret. People knew about it. They may not have believed it, but now, with two guys teleporting into what is essentially Times Square and just plain telling everyone everything, Union just gets to produce a legally binding document called the First Contact Accords and not tell anyone anything about the what and the why and the how? And these events happened around the year 3000 U. It's been a secret for 2,000 years. The official Lancer books repeatedly state that the general public is not aware of the existence of Ra. But that literally just cannot be. It is actually impossible. Honestly, in this setting, especially with the sheer size of the timeline, the only way any of it makes sense is if any time the book says, yeah, but by the way, nobody knows about this, this is top secret, you should assume like actually everyone knows about this, because it's impossible to cover something like that up. The Deimos event completely changed the course of human history. By investigating its teleportation abilities, Union scientists discovered blink space, the null void behind reality, how to access and manipulate it. There had been fringe theories about it, but now that it had actually been observed, research in this field was catapulted forward. All the weird and corrupted code Ra left behind played a huge part in this, as it turned out the newly acquired sapiens of all these systems came from blink space. They were literal extra-dimensional entities, and traditional computer systems were woefully inequipped to handle them. These entities were copied and archived, the original systems restored, and from there developed the first generation of NHPs, non-human persons, which were housed in newly designed computer systems called caskets. The problem with NHPs is that in the infinite possibility landscape of blink space, they go insane. It's the AI thing. They develop into infinite potential and adopt entirely alien thought processes. Now, this can be very useful when studying some weird fringe form of science, but most of the time, you want your artificial people to conform to a human frame of reference, if for no other reason that you want them to make reasonable ethical decisions. So what caskets can do is shackling, creating bounds and constraints to NHP thinking that keep them sane, at least by our definition of the word. The problem is that given enough time, NHPs will think their way out of these constraints. So they need to be cycled every once in a while, roughly every 10 years or so, which means basically reset to their original state with no memory of the past. But sometimes they do apparently retain some knowledge. It's really, the law contradicts itself a lot when it comes to this. But some people do think of cycling as essentially killing a sapient entity. And honestly, they kind of have a point. NHPs are not used for all types of computing. In fact, they're actually relatively rare and used only for important tasks. Their development is more a process of selective, not breeding, I guess. It's like a sort of selective collection of expansions into unconstrained probability geometries or something like that. Most of the time when you talk to a computer and the computer talks back to you, it'll be in the form of a CompCon unit, which are like ChatGPT if it was good instead of bad. CompCon is also the name of the official Lancer character management tool, which is very good, and was one of the first of its kind to be good. I know Pathfinder has really cool stuff, but this is special. Intelligence reports on Aunic culture and religion were recontextualized and suddenly made much more sense. The firmament was blink space, except when it wasn't. Mitat Aun was a monist entity, except in the ways in which it wasn't, and all the esoteric principles that they used to explain the universe were just flowery language obscuring paracausal technology. Something really funny is that Union retroactively classified Mitat Aun as monist-2, even though it was the first. And it really is not clear whether these two are like separate entities or maybe the same one, whether that's a meaningful distinction even, or how they stand toward each other. The working theory is that they are two very different things with very different interests. The fact that they are blink space entities would suggest that they have nigh infinite power, but that power may be constrained by how much of it they can inject into the real world. Given the unpredictable reality warping cascades of some NHPs though, it seems like they're either restraining themselves or a lot less powerful than they'd like us to believe. There seems to be at least one other monist entity out there named a PEP, but if it even exists, it appears to be entirely uninterested in humanity. The Second Committee used this crisis to oust its political enemies by portraying itself as the people who solved all the problems and then took credit for all the advances in the centuries that followed. Once blink space infrastructure was properly established, Union's dominion over the Orion Arm began, overtaking old colonies and seeding new ones like tumbleweeds rolling across the endless void. The concentric circles around Cradle that made up the Union star charts suddenly boomed outward exponentially. There was a bit of confusion with the first contact accords that went along the lines of, why does this Ra entity not want us looking at the galactic core? How would we even get there? Now that was a very distant destination, but suddenly actually achievable, which suggests Ra expected and is not opposed to human expansion across the stars. Anthro-chauvinism made Union utilize its soft power to strip every one of those outlying worlds with thousands of years of history of their own, of their cultural identities. They had been lost, but now it was time to welcome them back into true humanity. The Utopian pillars still existed as a political project within the Second Committee, but they were secondary to the task of human expansion and domination of the galaxy. Key to the public image of SecCom's strategy was that it was socially restrictive and systemically oppressive only on the frontier, the worlds it was trying to integrate and make sane. Within the great metropolitan world, such as Cradle, it was much more tolerant, relying instead on the political apathy of the general public to do its thing. The idea that humanity was superior was not something people took issue with because, superior to what? NHPs were so human-like and yet so innately alien that they barely registered, and the Aun were too far away and also not particularly bellicose. Ultimately, anthro-chauvinist SecCom hardliners were not terribly numerous, but they did control all the important positions and institutionally captured the military and the Union colonial mission. Most of Union was still managed by technocrats with generally good intentions who still believed in the mission, and who just sort of kept their discontent with leadership decisions to themselves. It was, ironically, actual first contact with aliens that immediately did the Second Committee in. Most politically competent supremacist ideology, am I right? It was on the jungle world of Hercynia, some distance from Cradle, but not as far away as the Aun, that Union encountered the culturally sophisticated but technologically pre-industrial egregorians. So named because they understood themselves as living within an immaterial entity known as the Witness, a sort of egregore of their civilization. This does not mean they're a hive mind, though they do appear to have some poorly understood psychic abilities, similar to those of the Aun. Biologically, they might be best described as insectile, and while I can show you a picture of one of them, I should note that most of them won't look like this. Egregorians have a huge diversity of form, and they can willingly shape themselves into certain configurations during adolescence. They were ruled by so-called overminds, a special caste of leaders that would receive and collate impressions and information through the psychic link they had with all their group, and who would function as a sort of supercomputer trying to figure out what the best course of action might be. This is the only biological alien species known in the Lancer setting. There might be others, but it doesn't seem that way. The game doesn't offer an explanation for its scarcity of aliens, and really, why should it? I don't think you have to explain that. You can have any sort of amount of it and you don't really have to explain it. But this is a perfect time for me to go off on a tangent. I have a theory, and this, notably, has nothing to do with Lancer, by the way. It's entirely my own thoughts. I just feel like it might also somewhat apply about the prevalence of technologically advanced species in the universe. Sort of a Fermi paradox solution, if you will, although of course, like every Fermi paradox solution, it is flawed and, if applicable to reality at all, probably just one of several factors. Basically, if we assume that access to energy is the measure of the power of a civilization, the existence of fossil fuels has enabled us to make a huge technological leap in a relatively short period of time, because they are really just condensed, like, portable energy. They've powered industrial capacity to such an extent that they have allowed for the existence of an enormous amount of innovation specialists, which is foremost, but of course not exclusively, scientists. This is why we had millennia of slow technological progress, and then were suddenly catapulted forward in the tech tree by who knows how many more millennia. Our knowledge reached a critical point where we could make effective use of that fossilized energy. But here's the thing, there is no guarantee that other planets would have fossil fuels. The circumstances for their existence may in fact be pretty rare. Obviously, I don't know, but it would make sense. We have them because a very long time ago, plants existed in vast forests, but nothing could eat them when they died, really. They consisted of complex hydrocarbons, which were just not broken down biologically. They would just fall, lie around, and then through geological processes and it's a lot more complicated than I make it out to be, compacted and moved and catalyzed into what we call coal and oil. But that necessitates the presence of some type of process that creates vast quantities of hydrocarbons, while at the same time there isn't something that can digest those complex hydrocarbons. And you need to have that as the status quo for a very long time. The forests of today, to my understanding, are not going to just turn into fossil fuels over the same geological timeframes, at least not nearly to the same extent, because there are now organisms that will eat dead trees. So if that never happens, whatever species develops on that planet never gets access to a huge stored cache of energy that will boost its technological progress. I would assume progress is still possible, but much, much harder, and certainly a lot slower. Even the cultural ethos of how our age is about progress came about because we have made such leaps in so little time. We prioritize it, although of course not as much as we prioritize making sure the aristocracy gets to slow down that progress by commercializing it so they can become unfathomably rich. Perhaps it would be beneficial for spiritual and moral advancement to have slower technological development, but that won't help you if the evil monkey has a gun and you have boiled leather decorated with colorful seashells. Like any supremacist of any type, when SecCom actually came into contact with the hypothetical thing they had been railing against, they were shy and outwardly conciliatory. They did, however, make impossible demands of the egregorians. Basically told them that this was a human world now and they would have to sort of cede it to them and adapt to human exploitation of this world. And the Overminds went, nah, and started defending themselves. The situation of a pre-industrial civilization encountering an interstellar one is what we in the acronym business call an OCP, an out-of-context problem. Even through their protracted 60-year campaign of jungle warfare on a world they knew well, they never stood a chance against Union and its genocide mechs. SecCom enacted a doctrine of TBK, Total Biome Kill, with the explicit aim to turn all of Hercynia into a lifeless desert. And as this became known throughout the metropolitan worlds, people went, hang on, I've read the word for world as forest. This is not a good thing that you're doing. What the fuck? This is alien life. What are you doing? It's honestly crazy that they could keep the First Contact Accord secret, but not the Hercynian crisis. I assume they just broadcast it. Look at us killing the bug people. Aren't humans powerful? But of course, the Second Committee was entirely out of touch with the culture of the worlds that they governed, especially the worlds that held all the institutions of power. They had their little enclaves of fascism, but by and large, people didn't like this. The general public had been displeased with SecCom for a very long time, and they had let that stuff fester because doing anything about it would have been too dangerous to the stability of Union. If you admit you have a problem, you admit that you are weak, and fascists crumble the moment they realize they are weak, because fascists are cowards. But now the flame of revolt was sparked, and as more and more people joined in, it became less and less about the genocide of the egregorians and more about all the grievances everyone in the human colonies had with the Second Committee. The Second Committee responded by becoming more and more repressive on worlds that had been ostensibly free and liberal societies for millennia. And so the people there went, look, we are going to vote you out, but we're going to be using guns to make sure you get the message, because frankly, you seem a little unreasonable, if you don't mind me saying that. Oh, to live in fiction. Now, I gotta say, a lot of this is conjecture on my part, because this is the only way I can even remotely imagine it happening. The book just says basically 2,000 years fascism and then suddenly no more fascism. Lancer does this a lot. It's an enormous setting with an unbelievable amount of ground to cover, so they have to zoom out and leave figuring out a lot of the minutiae to you, which in turn gives you a lot of creative freedom to come up with your own explanations for things. And really, isn't that half the fun? So the second committee was publicly identified as a political force opposed to the ideals of union itself, and in a period of 10 years starting in 4591U, ousted from the top floors of governance. Those institutions which they had captured were purged, entire administrative branches were dissolved. For their part, many of the SecCom hardliners made a strategic retreat to Ras Shamra in order to become Harrison Armory. There were a number of deals that would secure amnesty for influential individuals in exchange for evidence and information that would help ThirdCom prosecutors eradicate the last traces of anthro-chauvinism from the administration. Like, yeah, you can retire to some island on some world, you can never have any sort of power again. Except, of course, the Harrison Armory that would soon become part of Union. Ultimately, ThirdCom came too late to stop the genocide of the Egregorians. Luckily, they still had secret hidden populations in hibernation, which awakened a few centuries later. Union is trying to help them rebuild, but ironically, due to their innate adaptability, the new generation of Egregorians is being shaped in the precise human image the anthro-chauvinists wanted, and which the old overminds rejected. Still, Union is trying to pay for its mistakes. This has been the mission of the Third Committee. Aside from a strong commitment to the utopian pillars and the freedom and diversity of humanity, they are actively engaged in a process of righting the wrongs of their predecessors. And in that, they believe that actions speak louder than words. SecCom was obsessed with control, overseeing everything, making sure the rapid process of expansion they kickstarted spread the right kind of humanity across the stars. ThirdCom is much more liberal. They encourage colonization of worlds, of course, but the support they lend is universal, and thus many more groups and entities are able to afford it. So in another ironic moment, ThirdCom has overseen a greater expansion of humanity across the stars than SecCom ever could. Their rather hands-off approach also gave the emergent galactic powers a lot of leeway to develop their own interests, and even go to war over those interests. Union tries to mediate, of course, but it's not just political guilt over the overbearing nature of SecCom that stops them from taking the reins. It's also that it's just impossible to do so. Human expansion is too vast. The powers Union needs to keep it in check, the very powers which constitute it, too influential. Union knows it needs to save up its political and operational capital for when it matters, because they do interfere, and quite aggressively so, where human rights are concerned. Most of their interference happens outside of that though, and it's very subtle. Thanks to Galsim and the Oracle Chorus, they still have the power of large-scale prediction models on their side. And again, this is something that has allegedly been secret, like for 5,000 years, but like being honest with you, I expect that everyone in Union who is politically interested knows about it. Harrison Armory definitely knows. The people who founded that corpo state used to be in charge of Galsim, and they even have their own version of Galsim, though it's really not so good compared to the real deal, as they never figured out how to build bicameral minds. Union also hasn't managed to heal the rift between itself and the Aun, and right now it seems that the Aunic Ascendancy is preparing for war with a power they think is weaker than it ever has been. This is the world we find ourselves in the year 5016U, which by the Gregorian calendar is like probably somewhere around the year 14,000. And to be honest with you, most of the setting is still pretty high level. The extent of human expansion is cosmographically defined by a series of concentric rings around Cradle, each named after one of Earth's mountain ranges, which I really like conceptually, right? I have my own sci-fi setting where I name things after geography. The innermost one is the Andes line, and the current outermost one is the Annamite line. As each of these sectors gets progressively much larger, and their furthest points are ever further away from one another, other regions emerge that are actually much more meaningfully connected. All the blink gates within a line are named after peaks in that range. I also imagine there might be unofficially designated subsections of these rings named after sub-ranges of the lines. No one is going to say, oh, I'm from the Atlas line, or I'm from the Carpathian line, but they might say, oh, I'm from the Aures sector, or I am from the Transylvania sector. Anything beyond that is outside of the blink space network, though of course the farther out you go with it, the rarer blink space gates are even within the network. Aunix space lies spinward just beyond the Annamite line, and many other human colonies and other strange surprises lie out there as well. And of course, even inside the blink space network, distances between individual blink gates are vast. So even going at 99% the speed of light, travel times are enormous, and time debts incurred create a whole new class of citizen known as cosmopolitans. Alright, so I'm here in Space Engine, and I just want to show you a little bit of the scale of what the Lancer setting is doing. This is the solar system, in the middle is our sun, this is the navigation mode, and if we zoom out a little bit, on the right side, you can see the light years that we're at, and I gotta lock in on this here, right? This is vaguely what the book says, just about 440 light years is the extent of the gate network. This is sort of the space that is within the Lancer blink gate network from Cradle. Now, the first C8 near-light vessel was built in 1998 U, meaning it can go 80% the speed of light. And assuming that it basically immediately went in a straight line and then didn't stop, which is definitely not what happened, it could go out to roughly sort of 2,414 light years, which is just a little less than this. And if we look at this, we actually can tell that the shape of the galaxy, the flat shape of the galaxy overall, becomes apparent at this zoomage level. This is like the farthest possible extent of where humans have just been. If we now zoom out more, eventually we recognize this is the Orion arm right here, and we come to see the galaxy. Actually, this is quite a lot bigger. There it is. This is the galactic core. This sort of weird noise here is because this mode isn't meant to look at things at this sort of scale. It even tries to portray very small objects. This is, I believe, the Orcus Nebula, it should be. You remember in Mass Effect where the Reapers were hiding out? It's like this sort of area. Only two areas within all this are well described in official game supplements. The Long Rim, which is a large and mostly desolate swath of sort of nothing, no habitable worlds, but very interesting because it's like the main thoroughfare between the galactic core and a hot war frontier that various corporastates have a vested interest in. And the Karakin trade baronies, which are of course one of the eminent galactic powers, and who get away with having a rather stratified feudalist administrative society as a result, though not without much rebellion supported by a growing republican sentiment that doesn't exist necessarily even in opposition to the aristocracy, but is actually supported by a significant chunk of it. Aside from a few campaigns, which are very good by the way, most of the setting is devoid of content. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like they'll be making much anytime soon, since one of the creators is now under contract with WotC, and they have all their people under a clause where anything they create while employed by them belongs to WotC. This is of course horrible scum shit and anti-art and whatever, but many major corporations that employ creatives work this way because they're evil, like for instance Disney. So the setting is sort of stuck in place at the moment, and people don't like it. Or you could see the vast empty as spacious, because there are important stories happening everywhere, and they range from epic galactic struggles to scuffles between planetary nations. The fans have certainly been publishing a number of excellent supplements, but the game also from day one has expected you to utilize your own creativity. There's little dots of color everywhere to draw from. There are hundreds of settled systems out there, some of them highly advanced, others Stone Age primitive, some of them clearly descended from a culture that is familiar to us, others utterly unrecognizable. All of them have their own cultures, politics, regional interests, and relationships to Union. Even within the Blink Space Network, there are tens of thousands of unexplored worlds, uncontacted peoples, unexploited potential. Who knows what mysteries might be found in our own backyard? But so you don't have to come up with all this by yourself, I am going to give you some pointers as to what a Lancer campaign might be about. Well, aside from you and the meaningful relationships you develop with your friends, because that is what every Lancer game is about. You might be agents navigating a world of secrecy and subterfuge, embroiled in complex schemes where the most important thing is not to be found out, and if you are found out, not to be caught. Espionage-type games create an innate issue in that you're not really spies. You are people who pilot building-sized mechs in devastating combat encounters that might accidentally level a small Italian village in a single round of combat. Not exactly the type of thing that goes unnoticed, especially in a high-tech world. For this sort of game, you might have a whole lot of out-of-the-mech pilot gameplay, punctuated by moments of quick and explosive violence. This can work if you're fine with the mechanics of anything outside mech combat being a little bare bones, or as I prefer to describe them, narrative focused. And that might even be beneficial to the flow of the story. Spy stuff is complicated. And a lot of the time, spy stories do not benefit so much from the nitty-gritty of will you pass this challenge? They're about loyalties and personal drama. You might also be the strike team that gets sent in when the spies have done their spying, and afterward you have handlers who make your interventions seem like something they are not. A few campaign pitches in this context. Kasher Montego is a Union administrator in the unusual position of having been reassigned twice, and not for a lack of competence. He specializes in something he calls high-stakes diplomacy, and has shown a lot of finesse dealing with tyrannical strongmen, dismantling their regimes without simply removing them from power. Recently, he and his collection of grey suits have taken up residence in the Nairamdal Blink Station in the Altay line, where a conflux of eventualities has given rise to a number of regressive dictators in various systems, and they're looking to make an alliance. You are his strike team, lancers from some of the toughest rocks in the galaxy, operatives he trusts. When an ops team has planned out a mission, you are deployed to the action and expected to disrupt entire planetary power bases with minimal collateral. A complication? He may not be old, but Montego is not a young man anymore, and you will be traveling quite a lot, accruing time debt on near-sea ships. In a few of your years, decades will have passed for him, and all of you have done some things that he is keeping out of the hands of the right prosecutors. The junta of military juntas you are fighting knows this too. Or perhaps your story might be that you all knew, on paper, what you were signing up for when the Union Intelligence Bureau devised a scheme for you to infiltrate Horus as a united cell. But now you've been undercover for almost a decade of subjective time, and you still have no idea whether or not you are on the right trajectory. You are adept at navigating their etiquette, expressing yourself within their cryptic culture, distinguish the power players from the pretenders, at least as far as anyone can. You know these things because you have become part of Horus. You still have check-ins with your handlers, but you've long suspected that they think you might have gone wrong. All you have is your crew. One handful of people who know that you are not devotees of Ra. And that's the way it's been for so long that you no longer remember anything else. But none of you came into this with a clean vest. UIB trapped you because you were all dabblers in the occult, in the world of hacking, in conspiracy theories. Following a trail of breadcrumbs and a number of weird operations, you are approaching an ostensibly irrelevant system called Dabi. Except, the closer you get, the more subdued chatter your senses pick up, and the more a giant pyramid-shaped space station becomes clear on your scopes. If this is what it seems, it's the biggest gathering of Horus cells you have ever heard of. You remind each other of the truth sometimes, but if a single one of you talks, you are all done for. How can you be sure none of the others have bought into the ironic meme liturgy? How can you be sure you haven't done so yourself. Or maybe you are an altogether different operation, a joint mission of the Union Navy and Intelligence Bureau, part of a small fleet distributed over several systems far behind Boundary Garden, dipping through the coreward borderlands of Aunic space, pretending to be vessels of various human factions not affiliated with Union. Your job? Planetside reconnaissance. Whenever a look needs to be taken at something up close, you are deployed. Incredibly dangerous work. They, of course, used mechanized chassis out here. Some even use parts and designs from Union space. Convenient because they are compatible. Your mechs are well disguised. You might pass for locals out here beyond the infrastructure of the Blink Space Network, and frankly you should. Right now you're on a world called Jöstingir, notable for its mildly toxic low-oxygen atmosphere, which the locals have adapted to by always wearing breath filters. It also has a very active high-atmospheric biosphere, which creates patterns like spider webs of light in the night sky. The people here are technologically advanced in some ways, and yet painfully regressive in others. All their spaceflight capabilities rely on the Aunic ascendancy. They have AC, but no running hot water. Some of it is due to their culture. They're a feudal necrocracy, druid dukes ruling the nations of the world in the name of a dead giant king, who will emerge from his tomb in the Great Mountain one day. Very superstitious people, but hospitable. You were sent here to make sense of some satellite imagery in Binslet, a remote region where the geology seems almost artificial, and there are a lot of buildings that don't fit with any of the local architecture. It turns out they are Aunic military installations, and something tripped the alarm. Your in-system ship had to flee. Rescue will be on the way eventually. The locals tolerate the Aun, but would consider their interference in law enforcement an affront, so they need to be clever. The locals also have the mechs necessary to chase you through the tall, yellow fern forests and through lichen-covered mountain ranges. You need to stay hidden to survive. If they catch even one of you, the entire operation might be compromised. And while you are out here, your bosses have suggested it might be nice if you could find out what all this Aunic presence out here is actually for. If you don't want to work for Union at all, perhaps you are part of a forward operations team of Smith Shimano Corpo's Congressional Diplomatic Corps, also known as the CDC, deployed to the world Tigiane, somewhat far from the Cerro Gordo Blinque. It's a world of stark altitude drops and stunning mountain ranges now inhabited by a civilization in the thrall of an ethnic caste system. Certain genetic markers, artificially introduced into the population before the colony made landfall, entitle one to higher social status. These are referred to as crowns, and the more of them you have, the greater you are destined to be. Competition used to be so fierce that laws were established over the centuries to make the genetic testing of newborns illegal. There is a ceremony everyone undergoes at 15 where the genetic tests are made, and the rest of one's life is decided on that day. Somehow the most powerful families always have the most genetic crowns. How strange. The government of Tigiane were flattered when SSC finally reached out to study their superior genetics. There's just one problem. You're not interested in the crowns. You're interested in the permanent genetic underclass, known as the uncrowned, whose genome rejects the alterations. These traits are valuable, and they are to become SSC citizens. You are here with a complement of mechs on a skyhook platform. Your job is to protect the diplomats and scientists trying to secure the uncrowned and their genetic legacy. The rulers of this world will find out what you're up to sooner or later, and when that happens, all hell will break loose. Another archetypal Lancer campaign is for you to be explorers. There's a lot to see out there in the great big galaxy, and mechs are excellent exploration platforms on distant worlds with no roads or air traffic control towers. Many of these places are also as dangerous as they are beautiful, so often the scientists will be accompanied by a security detachment. Plus, a lot of the time, scientists will themselves strap some guns to their frame and ensure their own protection. A few of them even become pretty damn good pilots. A character I played in the pandemic campaign I was in, Chi Patrice Kroll aka Sandalwood, had such an origin story. These campaigns lend themselves to long periods of peace and wonder, as well as seeing how the characters cope with survival situations. It's very man versus nature, and unfortunately, there are actually not that many situations where animals will pose such a mech-sized threat to you that it'll sort of create a standard combat situation. Though, of course, Lancers would be on the sorts of expeditions where that sort of thing happens. If you're a creative game master, you might be able to make up a lot of battlefield situations that are not about fighting, but more about puzzles and environmental challenges. The goal in Lancer is not always to simply annihilate the opposition, and frankly, it should not be in any game. You have objectives that need securing, dangerous terrain that needs traversal, engineering challenges to be conquered. A few campaign pitches in this context. The great and most iconic explorers, Union's famous far-field teams, deployed deep into space, far away from the blink stations, to survey potentially interesting worlds. This one had been nicknamed Draconis because, frankly, here be dragons. This world's ecology is dominated by reptile analogues, though that's quite a stretch biologically. They just sort of visually resemble furry dinosaurs, and even that is a misnomer because their fur consists of easily shed cilia that they use for reproduction. Some of them catch some errant genetic material on a rock face and begin to grow into a sessile filter-feeding larval stage that eventually pupates into one of these dragons. One of the most effective ways to spread your cilia far and wide just so happens to be flying up high in the sky on giant wings. Even if it's probably never going to be colonized, this world's ecology is a scientific treasure trove. Not to mention beautiful. The dragons are also very territorial and come in a lot of different species. Defending outposts and expeditions requires constant focus and a finger on the trigger. As far as I'm aware, Massive Press is still developing a game called Farfield, which would use the Wild Words rule system, the rule infrastructure, to model these Farfield expeditions. Having myself a video on the Wild Sea and being quite taken with the mechanics of it, I very much look forward to that. Another campaign might be as part of a Union Administrative Department's first contact mission to the planet Shimpalyacha, a distant world in the leading central quarter of the Himalaya line. It was settled over 1,000 years ago by very suspicious people who brought a lot of very big weapons. A few centuries after their arrival, the world was annihilated in a total nuclear Armageddon. Or so we thought. Nowadays, much of it is covered in vast deserts of bright sands that shimmer like mother of pearl. Vast structures of dead polyps dot the landscape like bleached coral reefs, though a few of them retain traces of their vivid natural coloration. This is all that's left of Shimpalyacha's once vibrant biosphere. The warring nations of this world hid populations in secure bunkers, and they're now back at war with one another, and the tribes wandering the surface in a Mad Max-style apocalyptic hellscape. Your job is to try and bring peace to this world, but you're not going to be able to do it without bringing the leaders of those bunkers to heel. You don't know very much about the populations in there, but you do know that the highly aggressive surface dwellers you encounter tend to be manipulated and enticed by them with technology to wage brutal proxy wars in the ruins of their old civilization. A lot of that technology is mech-shaped. Radiation is an occasional problem. The howling sandstorms are much worse. If you want to get a little weird with it, you might be Labrador Expeditions, a group of freelance explorers with eccentric sponsors who look into phenomena that some consider strange, perhaps even paracausal, but which you would describe as supernatural. You're not a large team, you're often strapped for cash, but you do have an atmosphere-rated spaceship called the Avon that, though incapable of interstellar travel, is comfortable and homey. You are pretty sure that you're somehow affiliated with Horus, but you're not sure how, and you only have a few solid theories as to why? Because of disagreements with local bandits who think you are easy prey, and let's be serious, the law, you're pretty excellent mech pilots. Currently, you're hopping from planet to planet in the metropolitan worlds of the Ural line because you're pretty sure that you have a real lead on an actual ghost. Not some virtual simulacrum, not a homunculus, but the bona fide spirit of a long-dead pilot named Glafira Parata, who is leading you on a wild goose chase to find caches of information she was able to store before her death. Unfortunately, her descendants, the Parata family, seem to be very interested in you not finding all those info caches, and every shady character in the core world seems to know it. Or perhaps you are a ragtag bunch, hired for security in the venture to colonize Auerswil, a beautiful garden world with a simple biosphere that has seen some terraforming. The atmosphere is breathable, but due to very particular and complex refractory properties in the upper layers, you can see the stars even during the day. It has placid wildlife and is rich in mineral resources. Why, you might ask, is there a need for security at all? Well, it turns out that this world has an unusual number of large and stable caves, which is why pirates have been hiding out here, far from the action, for a while. They eventually figured out just how easy it would be to set up their own mines if they only used slave labor. And so now these ruthless bandits sit on a huge stash of wealth. The mana assessments for this world are exceptional. Making things worse, Harrison Armory has sent their own colony ship alongside an acquisition and management team of the Colonial Legionate, and they have suggested to those pirates that there might be a lot of money in it for them if they make sure the colony you're charged with protecting doesn't make it. This isn't just about fighting enemies, it's about helping the colony thrive by securing vital resources and infrastructure, and raising a generation of crash babies that don't become deeply xenophobic. You can also play as what I like to call Rangers, the law, or if not the law, then certainly justice, flying around the galaxy trying to take out bad guys who have run afoul of decent and humane society. You're the cops, basically, the sheriffs, the peacekeepers of the galaxy, trying to keep people safe and protect the principles of the utopian pillars. And yes, that does include trade routes, manufacturing, and resource extraction, and certain markets that facilitate the commerce which creates abundance. Because the sorts of cops who protect civilian populations are rare at this stage, there's very little poverty in the metropolitan world, so like very little crime, and also they rarely run around in mechs. By necessity, you are the sorts of people who get deployed to the most dangerous missions. These might be a singular focused operation or a number of disconnected interventions trying to maintain order in a certain star system or sector. Rangers are not just cops either. There are all kinds of emergencies and disasters that they might be equipped to handle, like tricky survival situations in space or colonies affected by natural disasters. Of course, the vast distances of space mean that most of the time, when the distress call comes in, it's already too late. That might be pretty heavy on the psyche of your characters. Fodder for good roleplay. A few campaign pitches in this context. Kanjutsa Blink Station in the Karakoram line is home to IPS-N's Mengchong squad of pirate hunters, a high-prestige group made up of veterans from space conflicts all over Union, paired up with promising recruits. The station is relatively new and already very productive. There are a number of colonies here that were recontacted over the past few centuries, many of them rather low-tech, but rich in materials that Union needs. The local governor wants to develop their economies and link them. To that end, convoys of goods and equipment are coming out of the gate, including powerful printers to improve the standard of living, while valuable materials come the other way, going into the gate. This is a lucrative opportunity for pirates, as many of these worlds struggle to defend themselves against technologically superior predators. Your job is not just to be faster than these pirates, but to make them fear you so much they give up on what right now seems like a very lucrative venture. Or you could take a more direct approach as the 2nd Liberated Detachment's Zulu Company, a high-impact operations group of Union's Department of Justice and Human Rights, also known as DOJ/HR, tasked with taking what we euphemistically call emancipatory action on the moons around the gas giant Atkirik Krahom. Through a fluke of positioning and luck, several of these were identified to have livable moons by descendants of the pre-fall colonization vessel Tereshkova. Because they could afford it, a generation ship partly reassembled from the Tereshkova herself was deployed to colonize these moons, crewed mostly by people who found planet-side life difficult. When they arrived there, they did not have much time to marvel at the interrelated ecosystems spanning several moons. They marveled at the fact that there were already people there. A colony established via nearlight ships during Union's first expansion period. They had also fully adapted to life in space over many generations, and found even the low gravity of the moons difficult now. The problem today is that this anthro-chauvinist stronghold never allowed the Tereshkovians to integrate, and kept them around as second-class labor on their spaceborne structures. Numerous injunctions were ignored, either blatantly or secretly, so now DOJ has sent in the guns to enforce its will. The problem is that Aktidik Krahom is a wealthy and politically influential world, or worlds I guess, with strong ties to Harrison Armory, and they are entirely unwilling to let Union meddle in their cultural ways. Or you could be part of a multilateral policing alliance aboard the UNS Marthai, hunting the notorious warlord Fidalgo Bodanraiko of the House of Bridges, a disgraced Karakan noble who was once a great hero in the Interest War, which the trade baronies fought against Harrison Armory. They called him the Blue Wind, and even though he was from a house so poor as to be almost irrelevant, he was honored far beyond his station, blessed not just with great prowess, but the mind of a strategist, and charismatic to boot. After the war, he kept traveling as a sort of knight-errant, supporting Karakan interests. All this near-light travel is why he's still alive centuries later, in his subjective 90s, which thanks to medical advances means he's still quite vital. He never agreed with the barony's integration into the Union, and as his legend grew, he figured he could just get away with more and more stuff, until eventually his small fleet of highly advanced ships would show up as a portent of atrocity and disaster. Many polities have grievances against him, but among Karagan nobles he continues to be a source of much amusement, especially because he holds a grudge against the Republican factions within the baronies. No one would be caught sheltering him, but it's easy to say you didn't know he was camping out on your moon. The supply drops you sent there were for storage reasons. You had no idea such a villain was plundering them. Really, you are the victim here. The solution then is to go in hard and strike before anyone knows what is going on, just as the Blue Wind would. You have a warrant, and though it might get messy in the meantime, you can worry about the consequences later. Hiding behind layers of irony and false mystery, most people have no idea of the terrible things Horus gets up to. It's almost as if their more palatable and chaotic operations served as cover for the atrocities they commit, which they don't advertise very much at all. These crimes are no less bizarre, of course. Twins abducted, life support infrastructure turned against a crew, autonomous security units going on a rampage to cover up a heist, mine shafts blown with workers inside. Authorities rarely see the pattern, but you do. You track and pursue specific Horus cells you have identified as being the worst, trying to prevent them from executing their plans. You tend to be too late to intervene, but just in time to dampen the aftermath. Horus, for their part, seem rattled. Wherever you go, authorities receive anonymous tips as to your alleged crimes. Strange accounts on the Omninet talk about you as vigilantes that should be distrusted, yet you have never met anyone who particularly disliked you. In spite of many official warnings, benefactors you struggle to identify continue to supply you with gear and information. You might be a pawn in a greater game, but right now all you know is that you are making a difference. The last few attacks were much more subtle, as if Horus was trying to limit casualties. Of course, that might just be because they're planning something truly horrifying. The next classic Lancer campaign type is that of the Rebels. In spite of Union's best efforts, there's still a lot of injustice in the galaxy, and let's be honest, when it comes to some of its more powerful internal power players and corporastates, Union's best efforts are a little limp-wristed. Whether you're fighting for your own freedom or the freedom of others, doing it out of conviction or for a check, you are fighting the powers that be, and you're paying the cost. Rebels often fight in states of privation. They often don't have the supply lines or resources for anything other than asymmetrical guerrilla warfare. And though mechs are excellent for that kind of operation, your enemy does ultimately have superior firepower. Securing resources and alliances should be just as important in this sort of campaign as fighting a successful battle. You also need to shore up public support and protect your good works from retaliation. Not every rebel cause is always just either, but those who are tend to find sponsors beyond the stars including, very often, Union intelligence trying to interfere without actually interfering. This sort of campaign can be pretty straightforward, but there's also a lot of room for complexity in roleplay as factionalism and extremism drives a wedge between you as a group, or between you and your allies. And it becomes difficult to maintain support for a liberation movement when the retaliation on civilian populations is so very harsh. A few campaign pitches in this context. They call you ungratefuls and you wear the name with pride. Because what do you have to be grateful for? Should you be grateful to be serfs, doing back-breaking labor for the noble houses of Caracas, being denied the riches you worked for while the barons have more than they could ever hope to spend? Crammed into apartment blocks, named with the label of ignoble, as though you have a hereditary condition that deserves subjugation, having your dignity trampled every day. Oh, your basic needs are met, but they are indeed quite basic, and it is only a given when there is no shortage all of a sudden, which the barons love imposing as punishment, or just for fun. There are many movements of ungratefuls across Baronic space. Yours is the one on Yikam Kopra, known to the nobles as the Exalted Garden of Flowers. It is a place of abundant flora, but with nothing akin to trees. Instead, colorful flowers coat the lands, a fluke of terraforming. Majestic winds cover the skies and petals for most of the year. Inspired by the successes on Sanjak, you have been at war with the barons for decades. And while it was mostly hit and runs thus far, the tide seems to be turning. Your people used to think themselves favored, but with the growth of the Republican movement in the baronies almost overnight, the idea of abolishing ignobility as a concept became not just acceptable discussion, but inescapable. Now a lot of the newly minted rebels look to you for guidance. Will they actually stand with you when things get tough? Or is this just a fad to them? Do you have the option to say no? Harrison Armory acquisition and management teams have a tendency to embed themselves on a planet and foment rebellion against liberal powers for decades before the legions finally make a move. They recruit underground armies of brainwashed fools and entice political players with prospects of great wealth and status among the great Armory families. Things are no different on Uenua, a world covered in the fossilized bones of ancient leviathans that create organic landforms which look terrible at dusk. The current government is a system of guilds which are collectively owned by their members, with republican elections that are as intransparent as they are corrupt. Still, the guilds have never been repressive. The people are content, and the spoils of Union's abundance are, for the most part, justly shared. Until a recent bloodless coup d'etat by a completely new ultra-conservative political movement known as the Order of the Morning, which opposes Union and wishes to return to traditional ways that never existed. This made Union intelligence suspicious, and in the civil war that followed, it picked its players carefully. Because of the method of their takeover, the Order of the Morning is effective at portraying itself as reasonable, while the rebels are the violent ones. This is even though they face private militias even more frequently than government armies. But the directive is clear. The Order of Morning needs to be stopped. This world will not fall to Harrison Armory and their machinations. The Sarapal system has been wealthy for a long time, but it has been tense for a long time too. 3 different waves of colonization over 4 planetary bodies, spawning dozens of factions that never ended up forming a unified government. It seems like everyone has grievances against everyone else, and most of them are moot justifications for violence and prejudice. Except, of course, the grievances of your faction, the Greater Path Political League. You have always stood up for the rights of the impoverished outer system, and now that the skirmishes between the greater factions of the inner system are coming to a head, you see your opportunity to establish yourself as a dominant power and insist upon your agenda. The problem is that, aside from the Pure Water Alliance and the Tree of Families Protectorate sending forces to secure their assets, 2 other factions have also gotten it into their heads that they, not you, should be the saviors of the outer system. But let's be serious. The Shining Lion movement are supremacist thugs who want to subjugate the inner system in turn, and they've never shown much regard for the populations they control. While the group of Wings may have started nobly many years ago, but has since become nothing more than a criminal cartel. Accusations that you yourselves are primarily agents of the upper crust of the outer system are nonsense. You do, after all, have the public mandate, and you would serve the people properly, if only they let you. It all seems like a dream now, but it was not so long ago that Mera Kaulidis took over Wenshan Blink Station. Discontent had been brewing for a long time, and it being a very new station, there was little in the way of established power structures. The Union governor was off station for a bit, forces had been deployed to instability in the sector, and suddenly an ordinary night of revelry turned into a takeover of the station you barely remember anything of. All you know is you have a charismatic leader with no official title who is factually in charge of it all. And Union did nothing. You expected to be cut off, but they knew the station would collapse without gate travel, so now you just are in charge, and it's difficult. Your people may have technical expertise, but administration is a little beyond them, and now every sinister element in the sector is trying to establish a foothold here. You need to make sure law and order remains on this station, which is slowly being taken over by marauders hiding out in the vast empty structures built for future expansion. A Union fleet must be on its way, but at this point everyone knows Union does not want to simply take back what is theirs. They want to humiliate you, as you humiliated them. Show the galaxy that whatever your ambitions, only Union can manage this type of infrastructure. Your glorious leader is assuring everyone that things will be under control soon, but sometimes you think she just enjoys being queen of the anarchists. How did she manage to take over all the key station systems anyway? No one wants to say it, but some question whether she is really in it for some abstract ideal or just her own self-aggrandizement. And on the topic of that, it would be nice to know what any of the ideals anyone is fighting for are in the first place, because right now, it all just seems like a bender that spiraled seriously out of control. You might also choose to go around that the game does not necessarily intend, but which it absolutely allows, and become rogues. By this I mean not necessarily evil guys, but certainly bad guys. People who operate in the grey or dark areas of the law, and in this setting usually not out of necessity, because, you know, if you have the ability to travel the stars and fight with mechs, you could just go to the metropolitan worlds where all your needs are met. No, you'd become rogues through ambition, obligation, weird political ideas, or just a sheer lack of scruples and general disdain for the innocent. Stories like these, they carry a huge risk, I think, of devolving into murder hobo campaigns, but I think Lancer tempers this somewhat by drawing a line between interpersonal roleplay mechanics and mech combat mechanics. Yes, in your mechs you may be incredible killing machines, but as pilots, you are just people like everyone else. And though as players most of your time will be spent in mech combat, your characters spend most of their time outside their mechs. It'll force some concessions to sociability, at least. Depending on why you've chosen this life, there's a lot of interesting space here for questioning your reasons as you are slowly ground down by moral decay. And maybe a campaign like this will end with the characters falling apart. It would be a great way to illustrate the futility of these things in a world like the one Lancer tries to portray. A few campaign pitches in this context. They call you outlaws, and quite frankly, you can't say it ain't true. For well over a millennium, the horseshoe rim of what Union calls the Alte line was a place not exactly lawless, but where you could be free and do as you pleased. You could knock over those who deserve knocking over, and if you knocked over the wrong guys, well, you know, you should have been smarter. Staying loyal to the people around you, building a community of folks you can trust, is still the best way to get out of that. Now Union, with its newly constructed Turgen Blink Station, is bringing civilization And suddenly you're expected to work as law-abiding citizens, be placated by their promises of abundance. But you've heard stories. You know how they just sit around all day in their apartments, doing drugs, watching entertainment feeds. And that life just ain't for you. With all the wealth pouring in, a crew like yourselves can make a lot of money hitting fools. The locals have never been too smart. That's why you were able to take them for so much over the years. But the ultimate prize, the thing you're really angling to steal, is a Union Schedule 3 printer. And on the way there, you are going to take everything that isn't nailed down. So when you finally hop on that Neolite vessel and get out of here for good, you'll be rich on the Golden Shore. Of course, you have a lot of old enemies, and most of them gained access to Union's new technologies long before you did. You would never be something as base as a pirate. No, you are privateers. You don't have a letter of marque per se, but you have legal guarantees that Harrison Armory will protect you with the best lawyers and all their political pull if you get caught. Your small fleet of ships centered around the Neolite Interceptor Void Rambler can take ships anywhere, from orbital snatchers to deep space chasers. But what you are really here for, and what your employer wants most of all, is for you to take down Neolite freighters of the Karakin trade baronies in the interstellar void. Sneak up on them in the plume of their exhaust, or just be where you know they will be, ready to match their vector. This requires gathering intelligence, which involves a lot of violence, usually doing favors for shady characters in exchange for information. It also requires a lot of Neolite travel, so you have to be as sharks, with no attachments out there in the world. All there is the prize. No people, no causes, no weights around the ankles. Recently, you've come back to the Heartlands, a hot tip for the Kunlun line. Unfortunately, that hot tip came with bad news. The Albatross knows you're here, and they're going to try and lay a trap for you. Are you willing to fly into that with open eyes? Do you trust the Armory to have your back, even out here? Protectionism is a bitch. Union doesn't like it, but a lot of places out there along the frontier impose tariffs, taxes, and bans on certain products they wish to keep control over. Thankfully, there are groups like the Vanadium Ring who can get those sorts of things to the people who want them. Then there's the stuff Union itself restricts, often in an underhanded manner. There's just certain technologies, means of entertainment that Union allows on its metropolitan worlds, but which they think would be ruinous to the developing frontier if let loose on those populations without any control. So yeah, you are smugglers, or rather the enforcers of smugglers, the security, people who deal with competition that gets a little too uppity. It's not glamorous work, but boy does it pay well. It involves a fair amount of navigating the politics of various different segments of the ring. And really, you don't want deals to go south, but this industry built on trust sure has a shortage of it. Most of the time, Union security forces are the least of your worries. As a matter of fact, it can feel as though your bringing in of illicit goods from the metropolitan worlds is not just tolerated, but encouraged, as though they wanted the worlds you traffic to get used to the sorts of drugs they can do on Cradle gradually. But then, what do they say about gift horses, eh? There's nothing fundamentally immoral about being a mercenary company. The galaxy is full of them, but they all have their own reputation, and yours is special. Scythe, that's all capitals, is small, just an elite team and their auxiliaries. Part of the reason for this is that few people have the ability to stomach the sort of work you do. Every mercenary company has standards, and so do you. It just so happens that your standards are not moral standards, but quality standards. You do any sort of work, no questions asked. And as a result, you only get the dirtiest jobs. But the money you get is clean. It's a prerequisite of your payment process. Ironically, you're almost like a religious order, having been around since the days of the Second Committee. Did a lot of work for them too, although you don't really see eye to eye with the Armory anymore. Recently, you have been contracted by someone with a lot of money to take out someone named Windsor Trung Hua. The challenge? He's one of the most important executives of Smith Shimano Corpro, living in a vast palace on the metropolitan garden world of Molkulik. one of the few worlds entirely administered by SSC. It's not really clear to you yet what it is that he does, except that it seems to involve massive deals with huge amounts of money and inventory changing hands. A lot of it also seems to center around paracausal technologies. Will you lure him out? Will you just drop in? Who is this client anyway that wants this man dead? Have you maybe bitten off a little more than you can chew? In that vein, of course, the final and most classic Lancer campaign archetype is to be soldiers. That's what Lancers ultimately are, right? Pilots of great big killing machines. The heroic status beyond that is like cultural artifice. As Lancers, you have a certain ability to pick and choose. You need not fight just for a paycheck. A lot of conflicts want your gun. You can afford to fight for a cause. This sort of campaign can easily revolve just around combat encounter after combat encounter, interspersed with the occasional scene of amicable companionship in the mech hangar. There could also be a big strategic element to it though. Grand-scale decisions not necessarily made by your character, but definitely made by your players to see where the campaign will go. Most factions in Lancer try to keep war crimes to a minimum, so while there is room to explore this sort of thing, there is a difficulty in this though, since the game does see itself as a sort of political commentary. Like, you can be Top Gun, but war does have an innate negative political connotation to it. Even when you are fighting the bad guys, you are still doing violence, no matter how justified. I would not gloss over this, but at the end of the day, it is your table's balance to strike. A few campaign pitches in this context. Battle Group Amity is one of the Union Navy's most storied fleets. Dozens of ships, distinguished over hundreds of major battles over several generations. Like every battle group, it has its own culture and aesthetic, and in this case, something almost mystical is going on, with layered robe uniforms, Arabic arches, and holographic starfields on the ceiling. Esoteric lore abounds. Everyone has talismans and trinkets. The best mechanics are called shamans. Rituals are observed knowing they accomplish nothing supernatural, but still, it's better to be safe than sorry, right? After a few years patrolling desolate regions as a deterrent, you have been called to the Boundary Garden region in anticipation of a major Aunic crusade against Union. Skirmishes are already starting, not with the Aun, but with many local interests who anticipate profits when the war is over and Union has won. Your squad of Lancers, Task Force Sephiroth, is already seeing a lot of action because of this. Everyone's a little antsy about what's to come. The Aun are a terrifying enemy with a lot of strange technologies, and they fight with no mercy and no quarter. The Aunic Crusade, if indeed it happens, is of course a massive meta-plot point in the Lancer universe. So open this can of worms with caution. This sort of campaign might be one of the few that could change the face of the galaxy forever. You can, by the way, play as a whole battle group in the Lancer spin-off RPG Lancer Battle Group, where you do get to make these sorts of grand strategic decisions. Maybe an integrated campaign might be nice for that. You are the Fort's chosen, personal champions of the leadership of the Karakin House of Smoke. You are formally part of the Étage Principal, the House of Smoke's principal military company. But you stand apart from them. You don't even see very much time on the battlefield, but you do spend a lot of time fighting in the tournaments that the Barons are so very fond of. These come with all sorts of competitions, from classic aim and shoot to complex war games over fake battlefields and campaigns that can last weeks. You've done it all. And it is safe to say that you are one of the best teams in Baronic space. A campaign like this would feature a lot of courtly etiquette, feasts and festivals. It's more one of the most knightly ones, right? Perhaps there might also be intrigue and diving into themes like dark sides of fame, and training montages. There will be a lot of training montages. The pressure on you is high, as you represent a lot of prestige for your bloodlines, your families, and the great house you serve. Everything you do will have consequences and social ramifications, and if you're not careful, you could find yourself in a web of conspiracy you'll be too blind to navigate. And then there's always that sinking feeling, am I really doing anything of note? Am I making a difference fighting for the baronies? Or am I just a pet let out by my betters so they can amuse themselves? themselves. The guns of Matru know exactly what they're fighting for and why. As anthro-chauvinist hardliners going to war for Harrison Armory, you know that what you do is all about honor and distinction. You fight those pampered Boronic fucks in the Dawnline Shore. Because you are an official part of the Armory Legionate, you can't fight in any of the proxy conflicts, but the main ones, the hot battles, the direct involvement, that's where you shine. To their credit, the Barons fight well, or at least their soldiers do. It's a shame they'll never make it anywhere, unlike you who can rise through the ranks of the Armory if only you fight well enough. None of you are officers, of course. You were born on colony worlds. But damn if you're not close to making rank. A campaign like this actually may well introduce atrocities perpetrated by either side of the conflict, and then hopefully a little bit of self-reflection on the principles your characters have chosen to follow. Are they indoctrinated? Have they ever really sort of questioned their anthro-chauvinist beliefs? Could they name their anthro-chauvinist beliefs, like one by one? Do they understand the raw deal they have by not being born into the Armory's great dynasties? Do they care that they are working to condemn all these worlds to the same fate? Is that maybe preferable to being ignobles with no upward mobility at all? These are heavy questions, and answering them should bear the potential of completely derailing a campaign like this. Others fight huge and consequential wars. You are just Detachment 26 of Towerlight Security Solutions, a mercenary company hired by the planetary government of Gunon Besi to free their world of hostile interests. Now, they're not the only people claiming to be the planetary government of Gunon Besi, they're just the ones who hired you. Other planetary governments have hired other mercenary companies. Add to this a bunch of marauding groups and outside influences, and you have a world where very little gets done anymore. Which is a shame because Gunon Besi used to be one of the foremost diasporan industrial worlds, with huge complexes stretching from horizon to horizon. Very little gets done here anymore. Any actual manufacturing needs to be done under armed guard, and the constant warring over decades has devastated so much infrastructure that much of the planet is just a trash heap where any building could collapse at any moment. Union has been trying to intervene and make peace for a long time, but in their pathological need to respect sovereignty, they can't really tell who should have the sovereignty. Soon all the powers of this world will be hollowed out by greater political interests, and the only people who will suffer are the inhabitants. Are you part of the problem? Maybe. But half of you were born here, and are looking for a way to get off this rock. Is it so wrong to want a better life for yourself? And that's what I have for you. That's Lancer, or at least the big picture, the stuff you can know about. Everything else is now up to you. Drink deep and descend. Fill the setting with life. That's what it's there for. Pick up Lancer, pick up Battle Group, pick up the Farfield playtest, or even play the new fan game Lancer Tactics, which they now have out on itch, and which is eventually coming to Steam as well. I've not played it myself, but I've heard good things. Not sponsored by anyone but my patrons, by the way, just to reiterate that. Lancer now in many ways belongs to its community, and maybe, perhaps, possibly, that was in the interest of the creators all along. It's fun, it's interesting, and if you enjoy it half as much as I do, it'll be a lot. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities. Consider becoming one of those patrons, you know, buying my novel perhaps, or perhaps my short story collection, which is behind it, or my friend Sandro's comic book. And in that spirit, thank you for your patience with me. I'm going back to work now. And see you around, Space Cowboys.